But I hope that this room anyway is sufficient enough, at least for your purposes today. I invite you to come back when our refresh is completed. Um, yeah, this is such an important topic. Oh, okay, my bad. Um, y- this is such an important topic, looking at the crux between research and social policy, particularly with regards to our social work research agenda and our policy agenda. Those two go hand in hand. And I think while people may say data doesn't matter, it's just stories that matter. It's just, how do you get a soundbite? As a person who's always sought evidence, sought data to help me, to inform me of the decisions that need to be made, of the kind of research questions that we need to ask. That has become more and more important as we live in a society that is becoming more and more challenging, and where our vulnerable populations will continue to see the safety net removed from underneath them. It's time for us as social workers to not only provide the evidence, but also provide the narratives of those people and those voices within our community. And that's the data that I think that we need to get. And that's the data that I think that we can utilize to convince our politicians and our policymakers of the right things that we need to do for our most vulnerable communities. Thank you so much for allowing me to make a few comments. I will turn the floor over to the illustrious Charles Lewis.
Thank you, Dean Spencer. And thank you all for coming out today. As Dr. Day alluded, this event it came about as a result of a few improbable events on the Hill. I guess many of you know that about that of Title 4B of the Social Security Act that funds child welfare. So it was recently reauthorized, and there were some pretty startling developments. First, that it came out of the Ways and Means Committee unanimously. So that means all Republicans and Democrats okayed the bill, and then it went to the House floor, and it passed 405 to 10. All right. So in this age of of paralysis on the Hill and just not being able to get things done, that was a startling development. And then eventually it passed the Senate. I believe it was 83 to 12 or something in that area, and recently signed into law by President Joseph Biden. So when you look at what the process, social workers played key roles in getting key provisions in that bill. And so we thought, as we were going into the Society of Social Work and Research conference, that we would come together and talk about how that happened, how we can make our research more relevant to the deliberations on the Hill. So now I'm going to bring to you Dr. Carrie Pettis, who is the CEO of Wellbeing and Equities Innovations, and she's going to talk about what we're going to be doing here.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited that you were able to be here today, and I'm really thrilled that this many people are already very invested and experienced in much of what we're talking about today. So thank you again for prioritizing this and being here. Our goals, we have a few goals today. One, you've heard both of our opening remarks presenters talk about the importance of making research relevant, making research matter to the people that we are conducting research studies about, and the importance of having research practitioner, advocate, policy partnerships in order to help make research actually relevant and translate into policy action. So today we want to talk about successful strategies for doing that in terms of making the partnerships work and the research matter. But we also are hoping that during the various networking opportunities and even in the question and answer time, that you're able to start to get to know each other and potentially have future partnerships as a result of being in the room together today and the reception tonight. And then finally, we really want to have a critical conversation around where we're at in terms of understanding families that overlap child welfare and criminal legal and justice systems. Where are we at in terms of what's happened? Where are we at in terms of what we know from the research? And what do we really not know and not understand? That as quickly as possible, if we can get in front of this momentum towards working with these families, that if we can get in front of it and get knowledge out into the field as quickly as possible using research, practitioner policy partnerships, that would be fantastic. So that's one of the things we're hoping to help facilitate today too. In terms of what is going to happen, we will start with panel 1, which will be moderated by Tamarie Willis, also a assistant professor here at the School of Social Work. So thank you very much for moderating. She will ask each of the panelists to do some opening remarks around 5 minutes, and then Tamarie will moderate the discussion with some questions, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers from you all too. If you can please use the microphone when you ask questions, that would be great. Then we'll take a bit of a break and then come back and do the second panel and following the same format. And then we have the networking reception starting at 5. So I have one communications thing I need to say. If you did not sign a media release form because of preferences of not having photos, the photographers in the room have been notified. Also, if you do not want to be in the live stream video, don't sit on this side of the room, sit on this side of the room. If you do not want to accidentally be caught in there. Did I say, where's Vincent? Did I say everything I was supposed to say? All right, perfect. All right, so I will turn it over to Dr. Willis to introduce the panel and get us started. Thank you so much. You need that? No? Oh.
Can you all hear me? Perfect. Yeah, my name is Tamarie Willis. I am research faculty here at University of Washington. And so I'm really excited to kind of carry on discussion today. And so first we're going to start off with having the panel members kind of go through and kind of talk about themselves, give a little intro, and perhaps a little teaser to kind of what we can expect from them as we continue the conversation. And so I'm going to start off with Ebony.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? It's closer. Better?
You can hold
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna keep it like this. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ebony Underwood. I am a social entrepreneur, founder, CEO. Okay, sorry. It's better. Okay, I'll hold it. All right. Hi again. My name is Ebony Underwood. I am a social entrepreneur, and I'm also the founder, CEO of We Got Us Now. We Got Us Now is the first of its kind. It's a nationwide, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that I founded that is built by, led by, and about children and young adults who have been impacted by parental incarceration. How did I get here? Let me just give you guys some backstory. So about 11 years ago, actually, this month, because last year was 10 years. So 11 years ago, after having experienced my father incarcerated for going on 3 decades, it had been not 3 decades at that point, but going on 3 decades, I was really exhausted. I was really exhausted. So I decided that I was going to speak out publicly. And what I did was I had 2 years, right? I had a 2 year span. And so what that meant is that Obama was in office and he was about to leave in the next 2 years. And so I needed to do something to raise awareness because he said that there was this issue called children with incarcerated parents. And at that point, I had never heard of the word children with incarcerated parents. And I'm a pretty informed person. So I was like, start like dumbfounded by that because how could I have not ever heard about this experience and what is happening and who's doing this work? And so that propelled me to say, oh my God, I need to say something and potentially get my dad home. Because number one, my dad had been such an incredible dad for all the 2 decades at that point of incarceration. Um, he had never stopped being a dad. He wrote letters. He called us all the time. Many moments I remember being a teenager and not wanting to answer the phone, and he would just be very active, proactive. And as I became an adult and still experiencing parental incarceration, it just made me understand the significance of his presence in my life. And so if there was an opportunity for him to come home, I felt like he definitely rehabilitated himself and he needed to have the opportunity to do so. So that was one reason. The second reason was I wanted to just alleviate the trauma, stigma, and shame that me and my siblings had experienced. We had been going through that for so many years at that point that I just was like, this is exhausting. I'm exhausted. And so I was very loud, very vocal about this. And over the course of those 2 years, and ultimately what happened is my father was denied. And so that was the first time he was denied clemency. Let me clarify. He was denied clemency because we were seeking clemency. He was in federal prison. He received a life without parole sentence. And so that denial was like a gut punch for me. But what I did recognize once I took a step back, because I had made it my life to do that work, right? 24/7, 365, trying to just garner as much attention as possible because I was tired of visiting prisons. And I wanted my dad home, and my siblings did too, and our family did too. And so many people had been impacted by his incarceration. And so what happened was I began to remember not just my story, I started to remember all the daughters and sons that I had met along the way that had been impacted. I had worked with over that course of 2 years. I became a social justice fellow. I worked with Google and partnered with them to do this campaign. We did 3 iterations. We had John Legend. We had people from Orange is the New Black. We had, YouTube creators and all these different people. But at the same time, I met so many daughters and sons from all walks of life. I met daughters that were and sons that worked at Google. I met daughters and sons that were social workers. I met daughters and sons that were principals. I met daughters and sons that were 10 years old. I mean, very young, from all walks of life, Black, white, brown. There was everybody, Asian, there was everybody. And so there was this narrative that I saw, and I just basically said, you know what? I need to do something about this. And so I decided that and I founded We Got Us Now. And so ultimately, with We Got Us Now, the vision for us was to really just amplify the voices of daughters and sons that had been impacted by parental incarceration. Because, like myself, there were many daughters and sons that were out there. They just never had the opportunity to speak. And so, what we did was not just amplify their voices. Today, I'm proud to share that we built a nationwide network of daughters and sons who we have trained and developed and utilized their personal and professional experience to ultimately help to shape policies, practices. We passed 6 pieces of legislation at the local, state, and federal level. And we have a top 10 rated podcast that you can listen to called the We Got Us Now podcast that you can listen to on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. And so, our goal is to be able to continue to do this work and really look at this issue of children with incarcerated parents from the root. And what that means is we can't forget the parents. And so my father was released in 2021 on Martin Luther King's birthday. Thank you. After 33 years in prison, and I had a vision that I wanted to create a moment where he could be a voice. And so in the coming weeks, if you all follow us, wegotusnow.org, you'll see soon that we are going to be launching a new initiative that incorporates the voices of formerly incarcerated parents, emphasis on the words parents, and they will be working alongside our network of actionists to do this work, educating, amplifying, and ensuring that families can no longer just survive, but thrive together. Thank you.
So to continue the trajectory of centering the voices of lived experience, I'm going to jump over to my right and kind of introduce Kimberly, who is a formerly incarcerated parent herself and now doing amazing work in the community at the state level. So go ahead and national.
Hello, everyone. Just want to highlight that my story is really big and long, so I got notes I'm going to read from so I don't go over my time and inundate you guys. My name is Kimberly Mays. I am a 62-year-old mother of 10 children. For over 17 years, I suffered from a behavioral health, co-occurring mental health and substance use disorder, and self-medicated with cocaine and marijuana. I enrolled in substance use treatment many times, but couldn't find housing, which kept me in survival mode, and then I would relapse. Sometimes I would enroll in substance use treatment and find housing, but had to wait weeks or months to get an appointment for my mental health, and I would relapse within the time frames of waiting. It was a vicious cycle. I sold drugs and committed fraud and forgery to support my addiction, for which I was arrested over 40 times, and I accrued 23 felonies and 4 misdemeanor convictions. Whenever I was released from jail or prison, I was committed to making changes in my life. However, I had no positive community support, safe and affordable housing, transportation funds to even access the services, and I struggled to meet my most basic needs. I would again go into survival mode and eventually just go back to how I knew best to survive. I would have been best served if I had been treated for my mental health and substance use disorder while I was in jail or prison, which would have helped me to not recidivate. The systemic response to incarcerate me for my untreated medically diagnosed illness of co-occurring disorder and the lack of resources and supports in my community were the main contributors to me losing my parental rights to 9 of my beautiful children in 4 separate CPS dependency cases over a course of 17 years. In December of 2003, I learned that I was pregnant with my 10th child, but by then I was too addicted to stop using drugs for my baby's sake. So I turned my will and my life over to the care of God, and I immediately felt this surge of hope that I could change my life. Miraculously, I was connected to a mental health provider named Roxanne Brown. She believed in me until I could believe in myself. And she literally hand walked me into long-term inpatient treatment that specialized in co-occurring disorders for substance use and mental health. Finally, I was able to get treated for both conditions at the same time, at the time that I needed it. On July 8, 2004, while still in inpatient treatment, I gave birth to my 10th child, a healthy baby girl. After I completed inpatient treatment, Roxanne helped me find affordable housing for me and my daughter, helped me enroll in parenting classes, and provided transportation resources, literally all the wraparound services that I needed to succeed. 6 months after giving birth and using the tools that I had gained in my services, I enrolled in college full-time, going on to earn an AA in Human Services, a BA in Public Policy, and a Master's in Public Administration, earning all 3 of these degrees in 5.5 short years. After 2.5 years of working with Parents for Parents, it's a program in King County that was all over our state, that utilizes parents currently involved in child welfare to help parents get their children back parents formerly involved to help parents currently involved get their children back. I prayed and God let me find 7 of my 9 children under the age of 18, adopted by strangers, names changed, total miracle. And I found the last 2 10 years ago. So now I'm blessed to be able to spend time with and love on all my children and help them to heal from the trauma of being removed from my care. One of my children in the audience right now, and her and her 3 brothers live with me now. It's awesome. And then the youth next to her, we found this youth was another example of a system failure for behavioral health. Adopted him into our family. He's thriving, doing amazing. And he has a family of mom and dad and sisters and brothers. And that's grateful for that. Love having him. The struggles and barriers and outcomes I and my children experience are very similar to the experiences of most families who are simultaneously involved in the child welfare and criminal justice systems. The criminal justice, child welfare, mental health and substance use, housing and employment systems all impact and intersect the same individuals and families. Yet they often operate in silos with their own agenda, policies, and practices, which can conflict with or contradict each other and create barriers to treating the whole person and the whole family. For example, the goal of the child welfare system is to help families safely reunite. But the goal of the criminal justice system is to punish people for the crimes committed. However, research shows that many people in prison suffer from some form of untreated mental health, childhood trauma, and or substance use disorder. These are public health issues and not moral or ethical issues. Child welfare and criminal justice systems could have collaborated and co-designed a plan for me to be sentenced to 6 months to a year-long inpatient treatment facility that specializes in co-occurring disorder, where parents and their children can stay together and heal together. Family treatment inpatient facilities can help prevent the need for family separation and can help the criminal justice system have another venue to send people who commit crimes solely based on their untreated behavioral health needs. And if incarceration is the only option, the prison system should partner with mental health and substance use programs that are already in the community to come into the prison and provide these services that are so desperately needed to help people actually rehabilitate. These alternative responses would help increase public safety, hold individuals accountable for their crimes, and help people become valuable, law-abiding, and tax-paying citizens who contribute to society, like me and many other formerly incarcerated parents who are doing great things in their communities. Not treating the whole person during their time of crisis is like someone being admitted into the emergency room for gunshot wounds to the leg and the arm, but only treating the arm and then discharging them with a bullet still lodged in their leg. That sounds ludicrous, right? Well, it's just as ludicrous to not provide a collaborative and more holistic response to people involved in our multiple systems. The cost of incarceration per prisoner in Washington State was around $108,000 per year in 2024. So obviously the money is there. Why don't we do a cost benefit analysis and see how we can borrow from year 4 and 5 of the funding that's already budgeted and earmarked to lock people up? These funds can be utilized to invest in creating more inpatient treatment facilities, more mental health and substance use disorder programs, and housing and employment collaborations. Mental health, I want to just iterate it again, mental health, substance use, and trauma are all medically diagnosed illnesses and a public health crisis, not just a child welfare and criminal justice problem. So partnering with the health department is another alternative funding stream that makes sense to utilize. Lastly, it's important to utilize lived experts like myself and the youth in all stages of research and policy development. That will help research questions and outcome measures be more relevant to the issues of those being served and help practice better align with the needs of those affected. I sit here as a living example of the benefits of investing in our most precious natural resource, human beings. Thank you.
Well, this was a great panel. Thanks for coming. Have a good day. Great job, Kim. Okay, hopping over to Dr. Mark Eddy.
Hi, I'm Mark Eddy. I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin and in educational psychology and kinesiology and health education. And I'm the director of scientific strategy for the Texas Center for Equity Promotion. And University of Washington School of Social Work was my academic home for about 5 years. So it's good to be back here. And I worked at Partners for Our Children here, and it was a pleasure and honor to be able to do that for 5 years. So anyway, good to be back. I have been working on research in the criminal legal system since around 1998. And at the time that I first got involved, I was looking for a system that really wanted to do something different with families. And to my surprise, at that point, it was the criminal legal system in Oregon. At the time, it was led by a sheriff from a county where Corvallis, Oregon is in Oregon State. And then the deputy director was one of the faculty members here, Ben DeHaan, and he was a social worker and had come out of child welfare. And his presence in that department did create opportunities that otherwise wouldn't have existed. So one Christmas time, I was invited to join a group that was convened by the Department of Corrections around the children with incarcerated parents. And the motivation was that a new women's prison was being built, and they wanted to make the visiting areas different. They wanted to think about programming differently. And they invited a whole bunch of people from around the state. And the first meeting had about 150 people, but only about 2 of us researchers showed up. But more than that were invited. So I encourage you, if you're invited to these kind of things, show up and stick around, because pretty soon I was the only one who stuck around. And I spent over 60 days in our state capitol that year, going to meetings and subcommittee meetings related to this group. And eventually out of that, with many, many partners and with full support from the department, we did decide to develop a program for parents who were incarcerated. And we did that by spending a lot of time interviewing men and women who were incarcerated in prison, by partnering very closely with the Lifers Club at the Oregon State Penitentiary, and by talking to pretty much anybody in the state who would talk to us in advocacy groups. And we interviewed everybody in the state who was working with parents in prison. And the fundamental idea from the beginning is that, yes, research is one of the wisdom bases that we should think about as we're developing programs, but there are many other kinds of wisdom. There's lived experience wisdom. There's the experience that comes from being, wisdom that comes from being an advocate and working in public policy. There's the wisdom that comes from being a state legislature. There's the wisdom that comes from being a correctional officer, or being a person that is providing services in prisons or in reentry programs or whatever. So all of that was on the table when we started. And of course, there's wisdom that comes from the various cultures that are represented in the population that you're working in. So we had that commitment from the beginning to create something that was not just evidence-based with the word research behind evidence-based, but also evidence-based from all these other areas. And so I would encourage you all, if this is an area that you want to get into or in, that you keep that in mind. And then also, I think the other thing that happened after that was that because I kept showing up as a researcher, and because even though research is under fire right now, there always is somebody who kind of wants to listen to research. I did get invited to be on things. I was appointed by the governor to be on the Criminal Justice Commission. I was appointed by the governor to be on Oregon Youth Authority Commission that made decisions about the number of beds in the system and all that stuff. So I got to learn more about the hydraulics of the system and about how decisions are made, for example, around, okay, a law is passed, how do you decide to implement the law in courts around sentencing guidelines and things like that. So I got to be in the middle of that while all this other work was going on. And we, with the Department of Corrections, we advocated for funding from the state legislature to finance the piloting of this program. We got funding from the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation and Robert Wood Johnson to help work on developing the program. And eventually we got funding from the National Institute of Mental Health to do a randomized trial of the program. So, but all of that happened only because of all the different connections that we had within the population of people who were inside prison and outside of prison affected by it, and the legislators that were often very reluctant to talk to us, but who we ultimately convinced to be on the side of parents, at least within the lane that we were defining it. So I think another thing that I learned along the way was that there were certain things I could and couldn't do in the position that I was in. And if I decided to cross too many lanes at once, it probably was going to stop me from doing the lane where I maybe could make a difference. So I did have to make a decision. What am I going to do in this role as a researcher, and how am I going to work within the public policy community and the nonprofit community and the Department of Corrections to really keep the focus on what we can do with parents. That said, when I was here in Washington, I did get to spend a lot of time with the Department of Corrections here. And I always felt like focusing on parenting skills and trying to foster hope and other things, which we have tried to do in this program that we developed called Parenting Inside Out, was just a start. And the thing that we did here in Washington State was propose a program that did focus on issues related to housing and employment and getting involved in future education and providing free cell phones and clothes and other things, and thinking about housing and having it be place-based to counties. So there is a program called Strengthen Families that we developed with the Washington Department of Corrections that takes all that and includes this program we developed in Oregon, and then also includes other evidence-based programs. So for example, we included in the Strengthen Families program a program called Walking the Line, which is based on work that was done at the University of Denver around promoting positive couple communication and good decisions around couples. And so anyway, I think the way to go here is to bring together, think about parents in all the different ways that parents have to be, not just parenting skills. Think about all the different partners that you need to have, including everybody affected by this experience of being in prison. And then how can you bring all that together and have a greater strength and really make a difference? And so anyway, it's been an honor to be able to work with all the people in prison and out of prison that I've been able to work with, and some of whom are at this table. So anyway, it's really good to be here, and I'm excited about this discussion today.
Thank you, Mark. And then next, Dr. Paha Charles.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Paha Charles. I'm an associate professor at a different school of social work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I just want to say thank you again to the organizers of the event for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here. So in addition to wearing the hat as an instructor, I spend most of my time doing research. I'm the director of the Lab for Family Wellbeing and Justice, where I work to both conduct my research and, importantly, to train the next generation of researchers, advocates, and practitioners, and maybe even policymakers who are interested in trying to make a difference in the lives of families who are impacted by the criminal legal system. That turns out to be one of the most exciting and rewarding parts of my job as a professor. There are sort of two cornerstones to the work that I do that really help guide and frame how I approach my area of research, which focuses really explicitly on the intersection of families and the criminal legal system, with particular attention to the role of parents and their children and the caregivers that care for those children at home. And so those two cornerstones include, first, community engaged scholarship. And so for me, what that means is always thinking about who outside of the walls of the academy should be at the table informing my work, helping to ask the questions that need to be answered, and ultimately are involved in not just doing the work to complete the research, but also to implement what comes next. And so that means I do work with nonprofit organizations, people with lived experience, both from incarceration directly or impacted by incarceration. I work with corrections partners, inside jails, inside prisons, and in the community reentry space. The second cornerstone, which is really sort of related, is around fostering research, practice, and policy partnerships. My background is in social work, but it's also in public administration. And that training has been really important for me in thinking about ultimately how do we affect change in society to solve big problems. It will not happen by me sitting in my office. It can only happen outside the walls of the academy with those partners, practitioners, policymakers, advocates, and most importantly, people with stories to tell. So those are two of the guidelines that frame my work. There are 3 points that I want to make about the topic for today. The first is that I want to say congratulations and thank you so much for the work that you have done to make that legislation possible. When I sat down and finally read in detail Section 113 of the reauthorization of Title 4B, I was floored because we have been waiting for something like this for a very long time. Now, that being said, at the risk of being potentially unpopular, my ask and my call is one day we need the same thing for all children of incarcerated parents, not just those who are in foster care. But amen, we got to start somewhere. Now, I am not an expert in any way on international related issues of parental incarceration and children of incarcerated parents, but I will say that potentially one opportunity that we could consider is to follow the UN Convention on the Rights of the Children, which is legally binding for all UN member states, except for the United States of America. So that is a potential arena and direction that we could consider going as we try to pursue how to protect the rights of all children in the United States with an incarcerated parent. Secondly, in reading the legislation, an outcome of that review was a long list of what I thought a competitive application would look like for states. And maybe I'll talk in more detail about that later. But the list is very, very long. It includes, having 2 large state agencies be able to collaborate. There are requirements around data sharing and agreements, service providers with a whole range of expertise that need to be at the table, training resources, evaluation expertise, informed decision-making about what kinds of models to use and to implement, funds allocated to actually, support the staff that are going to do it, and so on and so forth. Excellent, outline of all of the different kinds of requirements to do something that is critically needed and to do it well. Now imagine a world in which we took all of the effort, all of the energy, and all of the money that it is going to take to implement these programs and move them from what I think of as downstream efforts to upstream efforts to prevent incarceration of parents to begin with. My colleagues have already been talking about the holistic services that are needed in our communities in order to support children and their parents and our families and our neighbors and our neighborhoods so that they don't end up in prison or jail. So my ask and my call and my challenge to many of us here in the room, if not all of us, is how can we take what we're starting with, again, which is outstanding, and move it to an agenda that calls for an alternative to incarceration for parents and an alternative to the use of child welfare for children and families as the answer to some of our society's greatest ills. I will close by drawing from the words of Joshua Mortoma, who at the time in 2023 was a 17-year-old. He was the winner of a student editorial contest that the New York Times held. He is the child of an incarcerated parent. And he said, parental incarceration is the waste product of mass incarceration. So let us prevent mass incarceration, and I will add, let us prevent child welfare so that we no longer have to continue to go to the table to try to figure out how to mitigate the harms and instead prevent them. Thank you so much.
Nothing you have said is controversial. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you have said. And just quickly, for time's sake, kind of talk about just my background a little bit. So I came from Detroit, Michigan, where I was at Wayne State University in the Center for Behavioral Health and Justice, where I managed a reentry program for several years, where I was working across 9 prisons and 3 jails in Michigan, kind of handling what Kimberly spoke about, individuals who had co-occurring substance use and mental health issues who are entering society, and they're also in need of housing, they're in need of employment, they're in need of kind of having the connection to services before they leave, having their Medicaid reconnected. And it was in that work, and I've had previous work in child welfare as well in my undergrad. It was in that work and kind of going to those facilities and meeting those individuals on a one-on-one basis as they enrolled in our program, was kind of realizing the overlap of individuals in the criminal legal system who also had child welfare involvement in some way, shape, or form. Either they had child welfare involvement when they were children, either their children subsequently had child welfare involvement as a result of their initial incarceration. And so that's kind of how that came about, so looking at just some of the overlap of those 2 particular systems and some of the outcomes of those 2 systems and how they are almost parallel and intersect into adulthood. And so this is clearly a dynamic panel of really amazing folks with lived expertise and research expertise. And clearly, Dr. Mark Eddy's work, I think, has kind of been the impetus for pretty much most of what all of us have done on this panel and influencing the work moving forward. And so the foundation has been set as far as, how to kind of build those interests in particular topical areas. And then let's move into now how we can kind of bucket the ideas around evidence-based practice and stakeholder engagement partnerships and integrated holistic approaches to kind of addressing a lot of these particular issues that are being presented by the panel today. So to kind of really start, what are some of the main challenges, panelists, that you have seen either in research or in practice, or working researchers or working practitioners in kind of operating in this particular space. Some of the lessons learned and some of the challenges you all have had. Dr. Charles, I can probably start with you. Is that okay? Yeah. Perfect.
So I think one of the challenges that we are having, and certainly as we move forward in this intersection of parental incarceration and child welfare, has a lot to do with what we know and what we don't know. You know, a lot of the focus of the legislation is around enhanced visits and opportunities for parents and children to connect, to communicate, to bond. And the truth is, there's a lot that we don't know, but there's a little bit that we do know. So not all visits are the same. So if we're talking about contact versus non-contact, for those that might not be familiar, meaning there's a piece of plexiglass in between you and the person sitting on the other side, as opposed to being able to sit next to someone or a child sitting on a parent's lap. Not all contact types in general produce the same kinds of results, meaning phone versus letters versus now text versus e-messaging versus in person, et cetera, et cetera. But really what we don't know has to do with the context of evidence-informed or evidence-based programs in this area, because there really are not that many. And the ones that do exist, to my knowledge, have not been rigorously evaluated. I happen to be engaged in a study right now in Madison, Wisconsin, in Dane County Jail, which is in the capital of our city. It's the second largest jail in the state. Average census is about 800 per day. But we're just at the beginning of doing that study. Early findings will be hopefully presented at the upcoming National Children of Incarcerated Parents Conference. Already, there is some really important nuance coming out of this work that we have still just a lot more to learn about. So I think I'll stop there, but it really is about figuring out what we don't know and then providing resources and support to do the research so that we can have evidence-based or at least informed practices.
Perfect. So Mark, you currently have, I think, one of the only, and if it's grown since then, but I think evidence-based intervention for folks involved in carceral settings. Can you speak to kind of what Dr. Charles mentioned around kind of what we don't know? So as you were creating that particular program, what are some challenges you kind of came up against, and what do you think we still don't know in that particular area?
So when we first started to work on that program, the idea was to create multiple programs. One was a program that people would be involved with early in their stay, in their incarceration, and to help think through how to best connect with your children and family during the incarceration, how to do the parenting work that you can when you are incarcerated. And then we had the idea of having a program that was focused specifically on visits and helping people to maximize that visit experience to the best that that could be, and how that might change. And we had another idea of having support groups of parents that would be helping people think through challenges and celebrate successes with visits and with contact. And then we had the idea of having a program that would be going on near your end of your stay to think through how are things going to go now when you get out, and what are the good decisions to make as you get out for you, given your family situation. And so when we went out to try to get funding for all of those areas, the only one that the funders at the federal level were interested in was the thing at the very end, not the other stuff, which we felt the other stuff was absolutely necessary to make the end go better, right? And so, so in the end, that's what we created, and that's what we tested, but it was not because that's what we wanted to do, you know? So anyway, I would encourage funders to think broadly about all of the different stages of being involved with this system, and all the different needs that have been raised on this panel that go beyond just these visits and skill kind of thing. So that's one thing. Another challenge I'd just like to throw out there is that there are programs that I've seen that become quite popular for parents that are not informed by evidence of any type, of all the types I've raised out. They're more informed by an individual wrote it or two based on their own anecdotal experience. And it could be quite valuable, but it doesn't bring to bear all these other kinds of sources of wisdom that I mentioned earlier. And but those then get pushed, including by funders. And I would encourage funders to think about what is a reasonable definition for what an evidence-informed or evidence-based intervention is within the context of this population right now, and how could we encourage the use of the ones that are really drawing on evidence that we do have from these multiple sectors, and then to use science and the decision-making gain that you have when you do rigorous science to try to look at those things. But all the elements of those things don't have to be necessarily informed by research. I think they should be informed by these other areas too. So I think that it's really funders and policymakers that could push on those issues that I'm talking about. And so that's my wish list at the moment.
Perfect. And to kind of piggyback off of what you're talking about, kind of target Ebony and Kimberly. And so Mark talked about like evidence and like rigorous research. And oftentimes qualitative research is not often seen as rigorous and it's not often used. And so can you two, because you both have such tremendous experience in practice and you're kind of coming to the table with your own lived expertise, can you kind of please share speak to kind of some of the value of kind of hearing the stories of those who are most impacted by, this work and how your stories can help impact the creation of research studies or programs in general?
So I'd like to just back up a minute on that other question too, if I could.
Back,
So for me, it's not really what we don't know,
Mhm.
it's what we do know. So we do know there's a lot of programs that are working. We do know that there should be a differential response to incarceration, like what she said. How do we stop incarcerating? There's research that's already out there, but like you said, it's not evidence-based because no one wanted to pick it up or fund it. How do we get policymakers to look at things like there's lockdown treatment facilities here in Washington, Cedar Valley, where you can be locked in and do your treatment. And we all know that most are not nonviolent crime. There's nonviolent crimes that are stemmed from behavioral health. How do we get because that's a big, like maybe 70% or more, right? How do we focus on that population to make a differential response to get them treatment and services so that they can heal quickly, and then we can save a whole bunch of money, increase in all this stuff can be solved. So I've been doing policy stuff and decision-making tables for almost 20 years. And we were saying the same thing. 20 years later, I'm 62, I'm about to retire soon, because there are answers. So how do we work together to get to the answers and convince policymakers and funders to fund the answers? No more questions, because we have the answers. They're out there. Treat people. Locking people up isn't helping. It creates recidivation, da-da-da. And so how do we get together to go right to the hip, stop talking about it, let's be about it? Because there are remedies out there, there are policies, there's research that says if you fund this community, they're not gonna be poor no more and we won't have all these problems. There's research that says giving people treatment instead of locking them up works. So how do we get the research that's already out there, highlight it, show evidence? I mean, and then how do we fight this evidence-based got on my nerves for years, because first of all, you didn't create that evidence in my neighborhood, right? So there's promising practices that will work. Instead of researching and spending all that money to research it for 2 more years, put the money into the promising practices working right now. Put money into promising practices, and then we can tweak it like while the airplane's flying. Fix the airplane while you're flying it, right? Let's start flying the airplane and fixing it as we go. That's my remedy. Thank you. I'm sorry. Here you go.
Yes. So I would concur with everything she just said. And I would add, I would add that, I think a lot of the issue with, or the challenge that we face at We Got Us Now is that this issue of children with incarcerated parents is looked at from the lens of criminal justice. And, it's interesting that we're here with the innovation of well-being, right? Because that is where I feel like the work that We Got Us Now centers should be focused on well-being, right? And the well-being of these children. When I think about the criminal justice system and even the funding, right? We talk about philanthropy and funding around criminal justice reform for children with incarcerated parents. I see it as a totem pole. And the totem pole is that the focus is on the people that are inside, which it should be, right? And then what comes after them are the people that are returning. And then after them, it's now the women, because that has exponentially have risen, all the women in prison. And then it's the juveniles in justice. And then it's the children with incarcerated parents. And we often get conflated with all of the above, but we're also an afterthought in that issue. And so for We Got Us Now, our work has been really centered on and focused on child well-being and recognizing that we can't just be storytellers. That's a large part of what we started with We Got Us Now. As I shared, we've started with amplifying the voices of daughters and sons that have been impacted by parental incarceration and really trying to get people to understand, not just people in the general public, but researchers and policymakers and stakeholders, because what we found was that so many people were really just touching the surface and not getting to the root causes. And as a solutions-driven organization, our objective was to really get to the root issue for children with incarcerated parents. And so what that looked like is being able to not just be participants any longer to tell our stories, but really identifying daughters and sons who have had this experience that actually are researchers, are social workers, are lawyers, are advocates, and coupling that lived experience alongside their professional expertise to be partners in this work alongside these researchers, because I am often in conversations and I'm constantly educating people about the issue. And it's not, it's no fault of anybody's. I don't mind educating people. We work from 4 guiding principles that We Got Us Now: to engage, educate, elevate, and empower our stakeholders, our partners, our allies, and our communities, so that we can not just talk about the problems, because that's what research has, for me, has continuously done, but really provide solutions, because as a society, we have to do better. And so, yeah, I just would implore you all to, as you know now about We Got Us Now, to think about partnerships in that way and think about ways in which you can just figure out how we can, as a society, right? This needs to be, if we're bringing in different voices, our objective at We Got Us Now is not solely to be just a voice to share our story. That's a piece of the puzzle, but the bigger piece of the puzzle is getting to the solution.
So I've heard a lot from everyone here around the importance of engaging these stakeholders and having these diverse voices at the table. And that's not often a very easy thing to do, right? And so can you share with, the audience here in the room and those listening who are hoping to kind of do similar work and kind of being more engaging and bringing different people to the table and having these discussions, what are some things that have worked for you all in this practice and kind of engaging community stakeholders, getting to the table and having productive discussions? Because it's not an easy thing to do all the time. You can just go down the line.
So this goes back to one of the cornerstones of how I try to approach my work, and I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying I'm very good at it. But stepping out of my traditional role and taking off my traditional hat as a researcher and stepping into other spaces, I think has been very helpful. So for example, in trying to bridge the research practice policy, and in this case, the example I'll share is with a small p, to bridge that space. I partnered with a local county jail, with a local elected official, with, in this case, extension educators. So I'm at a land grant university where extension, the Division of Extension works to translate research and what's happening in the academy into the field and into the small towns and cities across our state. We worked together to convince our local legislative body to fund, for the first time, a full-time family connections social worker who would be 100% dedicated to supporting incarcerated parents in our local county jail. Is that my job as a researcher? Today, I would say yes. Is it for many of my colleagues? Not to throw anyone under the bus, but it's not what we normally do. So I guess my point is, no matter what your role is, your background, your training, look for opportunities and ways to engage collectively, collaboratively, and to step out of what we are comfortable with and what we know in order to have the kind of impact or to produce the kind of change that you're looking for. That small feat, I actually think, was probably one of the most important things that I've done professionally in the 7 years that I've been at that university. It's not the papers I've published. It's not the grant proposals that I've gotten. It's not the classes that I've taught. It's getting that full-time equivalent social worker in there to support parents. I now work with her all the time on all kinds of efforts. And so just an example of yeah, how to do it maybe in a slightly different way than what we're used to.
Just to piggyback a little bit, really how important it is really to use not only lived experts, but when you look, there's lived experts who are also professionals working hands-on with the population. You get a more, not their story. Now we're not telling our story anymore. I just shared the story of the parents I've been working with over the last 20 years, hands-on, incarcerated and non-incarcerated. So, and also what I saw in my work in policy, state, local, national, we're not asking the ground workers. They get a little survey or something and they might fill it out. No, we need actual ground workers at the table who can bring input. So it's a collaborative, like what Mark mentioned about how he and you, how you put all the pieces together. But then also, when we do this work, right, bringing the voices of multiple perspectives, as she mentioned, I'm just saying it one more time. I know y'all beat the dead horse. Let us start making action plans on creating solutions. And I just want to make sure that as we move forward as a collaborative, and whoever we're doing, I would love to be a part of this too. I'm going, okay, bring me in. And then how can, and Mark's really already done some practical stuff. So how can we start getting wins, right? So we go and within 3-4 months, can we start this? And like I did a judges training recently in Washington State. Oh, I'm so blessed. Family law, criminal judges, and dependency judges, right? All in this big, beautiful room. And I was able to present the benefits of how can they stop locking up behavioral health people. And the judges all asked me afterwards, how can we? They want to know. Judges, judicial officers want to know. We'll bring them in. How can, and give them a solution. So that what right here in Washington, there's the whole Washington State judges, every last one of them wanted to know how can they stop locking people up. So then we're going to look at the sentencing laws, right? We're going to tackle it at one time. The sentencing guidelines, hit that committee and help them change their mind. And then hit the judges and say, hey, and prosecutors, this is how you can do this. And then there's a solution within 4, 5, 6 months.
So I'm thinking of 3 things. One is if somebody emails you and calls you from the community, pick up the phone or write them back and talk. If that opportunity arises, take it. The second thing is make opportunities. And one thing that I've done over the years on research projects that I have is if we're doing a research project that involves a particular population, like let's say people who are getting out of prison, then have your team do some volunteer work for groups that work with that group. So, you know, for example, years ago, we called up a group that was doing transitional housing for women getting out of prison, and we were doing a study on men who are getting out of prison. And we said to that group, hey, you know, do you need anything done? And they said, yeah, we'd like a garden, you know, outside the house. Could you come build it? And could you know, pay for it? And it's like, okay, we'll figure that out. So we did, and that led to a variety of collaborations over the years that with that group. I still work with that group. Actually, we're doing a natural experiment right now in permanent supportive housing with that group. And a third thing I think about is when researchers create evidence-based practices within organizations, universities, et cetera, often those things end up getting monetized. And one thing that I've done throughout my career is that I've made arrangements with my institutions to not charge. If you create one of these programs and there, you do have some evidence that uh, make a deal with your university beforehand that for nonprofits to use it for free, that they're not going to have to buy it. And I think that's just super important.
Thank you. So I had the pleasure of being invited into authoring a chapter, thanks to the gentleman that I'm sitting next to. Um, Thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me into the space. I was able to participate and be a voice for daughters and sons that have been impacted by parental incarceration as part of the handbook on children with incarcerated parents. So that is an example, one of the first examples that happened back in 2019, where myself and Dr. Whitney Hollins and Tanya Krupat from the Osborne Association. We all, Dr. Hollins and I are both daughters that have been impacted. And then Tanya Krupat from the Osborne Association is a social worker and has been doing this work for many, many years. They do incredible work there. And so being able to utilize our experience and to share it and to be able to publish it was an example of being able to do that work in partnership with researchers that just opened up my mind around, you know, how I wanted to continue to do the work with We Got Us Now. I'll say this, you know, We Got Us Now works from 4 bodies of work. We do capacity building. That's with our nationwide network of daughters and sons. And now an extension of that will be the formerly incarcerated parents that we'll be working with. Additionally, we have partners and stakeholders and allies that we work with, just because it's important for us to be able to be in conversations and have these conversations together. So that's the first body of work. The second body of work is the content that we create, the content and media. As I shared, we have a podcast, so it's an avenue for us to share our stories, but also we create all sorts of media and content so that we can also reach our audience and people can learn more about what we do. And then the third body of work is research and data. We've been really wanting to figure out how we can get more involved and be more involved in research and data. We've had many different opportunities to begin that work. And we understand that research ultimately informs policies and practices. So research is critical for us to be able to do. And so the fourth body of work is the policy piece. So now we are currently working in partnership and in conversations with partners in healthcare, partners in higher education, partners in financial inclusion, partners in tech, because as the world changes, you know, I can tell you firsthand, having my father come home to never having seen an iPhone in person, never having experienced technology, and coming home during the pandemic, I had to literally walk with him through every step of the way. And going just to go to probation, you needed to have your phone. He didn't have a phone and he didn't know how to operate a phone. And so if we're thinking about solutions for parents and for these children and their families to not have people go back to prison, then we got to think about technology and how technology is so much a part of our lives and how it can literally, you know, either, you know, create some dissidents, which is not good. I mean, I had an experience where there was a mom we invited to be a part of our podcast, but she had just come home and she didn't know how to get online. And so she was embarrassed, and so she just didn't show up. And so technology is critical for all of us in all these sectors and systems because you know it's the way of it's our way of life today. So you know we've been really thinking deeply again about the root issues and thinking how we can be in partnership with you know social workers and people from different systems so that we can really do that root work. So grateful to Tammy. I did this a year ago, and you know, again, this is an example of a great partnership and being able to share with you all, you know, the work we got us now. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
So this is such a, you guys are great. So as we're kind of talking about, you know, like making these collaborations and the importance of research, and I think just kind of tee off what's going to happen in the next panel, wink, wink, about kind of research translation and policy connections. So how can we as practitioners and community-based members and researchers kind of work to ensure that when we're coming to the table to kind of design these research projects or have these ideas, that we're doing it in a way that has implications for public policy development? If you have any, and I know all of us have worked in the policy space, either at the state or local level or at the federal level. And so if you guys can kind of share some, you know, some ideas around creating research initiatives or projects or programs that could potentially result in implications for public policy, state, federal, local, or agency level.
I mean, I thought about this question specifically in the context of this new legislation, but I think my comments apply more broadly. So my observation of a lot of federally funded work is that our country is interested in funding the doing, which is important because we have to have money to do programming, and oftentimes it's hard to get that. But then oftentimes these federal initiatives lack funding to support the research alongside of it. And so thinking about the most recent legislation, Section 113, my ask or hope for as that RFP or call for proposals is actually written, and maybe it already is, I don't know, is to make sure that enough of the pot of money is allocated towards research. And then I guess the second thing that I would just say is, while it's important to make sure you have all of the necessary actors at the table from an administrative standpoint, a state agency standpoint, a research standpoint, people with lived direct experience have to be at the table as well.
I just want to quickly say, not only, because we all know how research takes a little long sometimes. So my idea for that is to help if the researchers and the community partners and the agencies and all the collaborators, we can help move it, start figuring out how we can help it move around faster. Okay, somebody signed to go get the funder, somebody signed for the policy. So how can we collaborate with researchers to help them get those other pieces they got to get done quicker? So, and I think each person on the board, on the team, should take a piece, like who's good at funding, okay, who's good at who has legislative contacts, right? They can go and just start moving things a little faster so that it can keep up and people and the population can be served better and quicker, faster,
Right.
quicker.
So you can hold this. Yeah, so I think we're going to move into the audience phase of the Q&A. So if you all have any questions for the panelists, please walk up to the microphone here that Brooks is now adjusting. And thank you. And ask any questions you may have to our panelists. Oh, and I'm watching the chat here. Yep. And also, if you're online watching this live stream, you can kind of drop your questions in the chat and we can make sure those questions are being asked as well. Don't be afraid. Just takes one person to ask the first question and the flood doors open.
Hello. Thank you all for being here. My name is Alexandra. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Houston, and I focus on crossover youth, specifically Black girls. But what I was wondering is, it seems like there's two sectors of this research. So those focused on parents who are incarcerated and those focused on youth who are incarcerated. And I was curious if you all knew of any intersection of the two. So parents and youth who have experienced incarceration and the child welfare system.
Expert in serving families like that, but I think the solution for both would probably be the same, right? The youth, like the youth we have here with me, that person, although their family didn't go on child welfare, he could have been a product of that. So I think the solutions, that's a good idea how to merge those two. So my idea is there are already solutions that we know about. How do we treat holistically those in the children and the parents? And how can we do it in a way that they can heal together and stay together? That part. Oh,
Agreed. And I would say that that's the work that we're focused on right now. So with our new program build, this is going to be the first time where you actually see formerly incarcerated parents working alongside children with incarcerated parents, who some may even be their parents. My father will be working with us, just around, be partnering around these issues and thinking about all the different ways in which these issues need to be addressed, from the people that actually lived it. So,
And there's some like controversial research. I know Mark knows this. From a dissertation where, and Ebony, I think also is probably not in favor of this research as well, but kind of touching on the point that, it does show that, the prevalence or the risk of a child of an incarcerated parents, they themselves becoming incarcerated them in the future is increased. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but is an increased risk of that happening, and not solely because of the parental incarceration itself, but because of just some of the external, public health factors that Kim mentioned, and community factors that are the same for the parent that it is for the child, that places them in the same higher risk of being incarcerated themselves. And so this idea of like this dual system involved youth and families, I think is really important. And I have some things I can share with you. So just like you can connect after about
I
that.
would love to chat with you after.
Perfect.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience?
I'm not shy. So in the research process, okay, where do the legislators come in? All right, I know Dr. Kimberly, I'm being prophetic here. No, you talked about getting the ear of the judges. All right, so do you think about the legislators before, at some point during your research process? Because ultimately they're going to be part of the process, and you got to remember they represent us. We all have representatives, and so does that enter into your thinking as you're preparing to do the research?
been able, with Lori Lippold in the back here, been able to be part, and some other entities, been part of championing a lot of different legislative in Washington State. And what I think is really smart, sir, and thank you for bringing it up, is to go find a legislator who to help you champion that idea, who will get other legislators to help champion that idea. And then, so that's really good to bring the legislators in early. And I used to we have a very good relationship with lots of them, Hargrove, Adams, whatever. But that's been a while, but you definitely can get to know your legislature. And that's a very smart thing to do that first, to get in, and then go upstream first, get them going, and then back into it. And you can also, it'll make things go faster. And then they also can use their own researchers and data people to help as well. Excellent idea.
I actually had a policymaker reach out to me specifically because of some legislation. It was called the Second Look Act. So it was Senator Cory Booker. His team reached out and wanted to give my opinion of some legislation that they were proposing for people who deserve second looks, right? People like my father who had been incarcerated for decades and just had exhausted all relief and had no avenue for relief. And so how I participated was that I came on board to provide technical assistance. And so that's, that was another way for me to think deeply about, bringing in policymakers or how can we get policies changed. And although it did not pass, it was a federal legislation, it did not pass, but because of who he is and because of the awareness that we built around it, it trickled down to different states. And so, it has been picked up across several states. And so that's an example of what interacting with the policymaker can look like. And I think it's important to look at from the inception of your work to, to the end. Like, right, we're trying to get solutions passed. So you need to know. And for me, we're nonpartisan. So, we're not into D's and R's. We're really about family and reuniting families.
And I think too, thank you so much, Ebony. I think I know the policy you're talking about. I think it's also important too, as research, to kind of radically shift how we approach our research, like from the very beginning, kind of thinking about not just talking about the problem or trying to define the problem, but thinking far along, like, okay, once I'm finished with this work, what are the questions that I can ask? How can I design this particular research project and approach my methodology as far as, analyzing the data or interpreting the findings that can have implications for public policy. So kind of starting at the very beginning, thinking about whether or not you want this work to kind of have implications of policy and having that thought kind of guide the way you formulate your questions and how you kind of matriculate through the research process all the way through. We do have a question online. Yep.
All right. I'll just add one more thing and answer to your question. And it sounds like Mark wants to add something too. So to answer your question, do I, as a researcher, think about policy and where do legislators come in at the beginning? Full transparency? No. Why? It's not how I was trained. Two, there are not many incentives in the academy to think about that kind of impact, even though ultimately that is what we're supposed to do in the short run and the medium run. It's very difficult to do that. And third, researchers, and I include myself at this, are really bad at translating what we do into spaces and to places and for people that are not researchers. And so my ask for the funders out there in the world that are listening is to support people like you, Charles, and others to help provide us with support, people, organizations to help us do the translation. The example that you just gave, right, of a legislator reaching out to you to get input, that doesn't usually happen, or it doesn't happen to me. And then I'm not picking up the phone all the time saying, hey, are you interested in my research? Or here's a way to think about this, new area of work in our state or whatever. So anyway, I just think we need help doing that translation. Yeah, okay, good.
I do think that talking to anybody who will listen at the legislative level or at the judicial level, and not only people that you agree with, but people that you don't agree with is really important. And certainly in the work that I've done over the years, we have spent a lot of time early on before things were developed talking to people on both sides of the aisle, just to prep and think through public policy implications in the long run. So I do see that as a vital spot. And I also see people who are in positions like you or like Lori, where they can get out and do that work, in a different way than we can. But I really do think that that is a very vital step particularly in the criminal legal system work to do, to be talking to the people who are going to ultimately make these decisions. And also, have the opportunity to talk to people who really don't agree with you and explain where you're coming from and find some common ground so that work is done early on and you're not facing it at the end, you know what I mean? So like prep work.
I have more of a comment because Kim's reaction to that question just flooded my mind. And I know like not everybody in this room knows who Lori Lippold is. And so Lori is a lobbyist. And so that's the one stakeholder group that we really haven't called out specifically is how can researchers partner with lobbyists? Because that is, and Dr. Lewis, another example of a lobbyist. I was a lobbyist before I was a professor. And so this idea of there are folks in communities, there are lobbyists who live in every state in the country. And lobbyists need researchers to be able to do their advocacy work. And so it's a critical partnership. They have already built the relationships with elected officials. They all are well known among the elected officials in their states and federally. And Kim talked about in her remarks time. How do we speed this up? I may be biased because I was a lobbyist before I was a professor, but you know, I think I've had 3 federally funded research studies that have been translated and are being implemented in almost every state in the country. And we do it from start to finish in 7 years, not 20 years, which is the average time when you don't partner with lobbyists and coalition leaders to be able to help speed this up. And so I'm planting that seed that lobbyists are really great collaborators and to really push the researchers in the room to think about that type of person as someone that you want on your team when you're doing exploration, and how do you ask and research questions to understand are they actually going to be applicable to what policymakers are doing and interested in now.
Perfect. Thanks, Angelique. We do have a question online for Dr. Paha. I think Clark Peters writes, thanks for the discussion. I want to circle back to Paha's comment about what is valued in academia. Too often this kind of work is undervalued in the promotion process. Can you speak to how we can potentially change that?
Maybe. I landed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our university system has a foundation that guides, or I guess it's a set of principles that is supposed to guide the work of researchers across disciplines at our university. And it's called the Wisconsin Idea. And the basic premise is that our work is supposed to be done in service of the people of the state of Wisconsin. And for the first time, I just went up for promotion a year and a half ago. And so I was deeply reading the tenure guidelines. And for the first time, they included a way in which researchers like myself could include the ways in which our work is applicable to the Wisconsin idea. How is it that you are doing work that matters to members of our state? Is it the top priority? Of course not. But I think other universities, to answer the question, could begin to think about ways of assessing impact beyond just how many papers are you putting into a journal that nobody else is going to read except other researchers in your area. So just thinking about other ways of assessing impact like the Wisconsin idea is my first answer.
Constituents, this constituent voice, right? So in your state, right? There's a lot of students, like some students that go to South Central, then, you know, for like our issues, there's a lot of incarcerated parents in college now. So for every state, looking out in the community, asking constituents instead of, you know, to what's important to you. That means they got to get out and get some grassroots going on and find out from community organizations what's important in their state to help inform their research, and then they'll know if it's important or not to the state.
I'm going to throw in just another party that I think you kind of touched on, Dr. Eddy and Paha, Dr. Charles, I don't call you that. And it's the system actors. And I guess I bring this up because even thinking about policy change, a lot of times I see, and I'm Sandy Mullins, I'm with the Family-Based Justice Center. We're out of Marin Institute in New York City, and our whole gig is impact too, which is so amazing because we can actually do useful research. And one of the things I see happening a lot is people have great ideas and they have a champion and they have someone to help them get the law passed, and they have great stories, and what they pass doesn't really do what they think it's going to do. And that maybe the problem is not what you think the problem is. So I guess I would say, I mean, I think the lesson I'm learning from all of our programs is, you know,
the system can't fix the system, and the money from the community, and the ideas and the emphasis has to live in our communities. But we have to know the breakdowns in the system. So like we helped the Colorado state agency on with respondent parents whose parents were representing parents in the system. And they're trying to get one massive system, that's the child welfare system, to communicate with another massive system, which is not just state prisons. That's the easiest. It's all the jails. And they found like, yeah, we have all the right things in legislation, but in reality, we can't find the person that we're supposed to notify. But it was this really dumb thing that was leading to parents losing their rights because they they didn't know who to talk to. They would send something to the jail. The jail would like never do anything with it. And so I think that sometimes in these big systems and in government, it's like we have to do a little roadmap of where some of the breakdowns are, because sometimes we think it's done and we've got it in legislation and it's just not happening. And so that would just be my pitch. And I'm curious, like, I don't know, there's always a struggle when you're working with system actors, right? In what capacity, but I'm just curious, like how, I think Kimberly, in your work especially, now you're kind of a system actor.
Unintended consequences of a great idea. And usually unintended consequences occur when the impacted persons and individuals and entities, ground workers and lived experts, are not included in the planning, development, implementation, and the evaluation. So I was on this committee with the Senator Begala, and so it was a great idea. They came to use my input, and then the CTED went into their little bubble silo and created this great idea on incarcerated parents getting out into this rural area and having everything they need hooked up with all these services, housing, blah, blah, blah. Excellent idea. So they're presenting the thing, right? And I raised my hand and I said, what about transportation? So the Senator Regala went, and the CTED guy sat down. Because if they had me involved continuously, I could have, in all that money spent for 2 years, called Looky Loo, and then it was shelved because they said it couldn't go back and and change that piece. Why not? Right? But it had a lived expert, different entities had been involved throughout the whole process. That transportation piece in a rural area, come on, think about it, right? Would have been implemented and then people's lives could have been changed on this great bill.
And that is my exact interpretation as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Kimberly, for saying that, because honestly, seriously, not having those voices at the onset of this work throughout the entire experience is where things fall short. There's so many holes. There's things, like she said, everything, they thought they were doing everything great. Then all of a sudden, had she not said anything about, wait a minute, what about the transportation? Because she understands the experience, because she lived it. There's so many little intricate details of this experience. No matter how much research you have done, if you have not lived this experience, you will not know what it truly is. And so that is where our voices come in. And I'm not saying to bring in all sorts of voices from, I'm saying bring in people that are committed to this work, that are directly impacted, that are committed to this work, that have proven that they are committed to this work and will be able to help you take it across the finish line. Because that is the objective, is to create some solutions.
I want to quickly add to, I think the importance of, to your point, of building relationships. It is so pivotal, because when I was in Michigan working with a bunch of, jails and localities, it's going to the jails on a weekly basis and meeting with everyone, the corrections officers, the jail administrators, the nurses, and kind of building out those relationships to ensure that when you're kind of reaching out and making contact and trying to connect something, that something doesn't drop in the cracks and something doesn't get lost. And so there's and funding doesn't provide enough money to cover the time it takes to kind of really build in a relationship and kind of cement yourself or mesh yourself into those systems. It takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of energy. So I think the length of grants typically are too short to do that. And the amount of funding is not enough to do that as well. So I think those are some issues that I personally seen when kind of trying to build out like partnerships with like jail and prisons. 10 minutes left. Thank you. Gail.
I am Gail Colfax, and I work here at the School of Social Work Dean's Office. And I support all of Angelique Day's grants and projects, and Tamarie Willis and Emiko, Partners for Our Children. And I'm thinking about 41 years ago, I read the Children Defense Fund reports. On my own, I took that data and synthesized it. And I lobbied the Washington State Legislature. No, a majority of the legislators took the paper I had, all the data, and threw it in the garbage in front of me. I didn't stop. People from WIC contacted me, and they used the data that I had synthesized to help improve WIC. I'm standing here and I'm 41 years later, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I'm a grandparent. Where do grandparents fit in? That's my question to you. And I think this is amazing how far you've come. Touched my heart, and I thank you. I've had family members, relatives who've been incarcerated. I have seen their children harmed, and I've seen them go in foster care, even when grandparents were trying to step up and they were ignored. So my question to you, and I will sit down after I ask, is how do grandparents fit in? And I'm the grandparent of 11 children, grandchildren. So thank you.
Partner, that's what my voice is out. Thank you. Grandparents, thank you.
And I think what we're seeing at the federal level, particularly in the Children's Bureau and the child welfare system, is a push towards kin care and preventative services. And so I think in the past, like I want to say 5 to 10 years, is like legislation that is attempting to address what you're talking about, Gail, is how can we? I was going to get there. Is kind of looking at how we can kind of reach out to the family members and grandparents who are available to kind of ensure that the child doesn't have to have further involvement in the child welfare system, and kind of moving from removal like lines first. Let's move the child and get them safe, to kind of looking to kind of see who's in their environment, either kin care, be it a relative parent, relative family members, or fictive kin to like a really close family friend. And so we do see that now at the federal level, like legislation moving towards more kind of centering the kind of placing children who are potential risk of entering the foster care system and placing them with relatives. And so that is something that we're seeing, and Angelique just mentioned, that is also essential to this particular reauthorization bill as well. The idea of like centering kin care for youth who are entering foster care.
Can I add one other thing too? I would also say to your question is with the increase of women that are incarcerated, a lot of times it is their mothers. So right there, the grandmothers that are the caregivers for these children. So if you think about children that have mothers that are incarcerated, children in foster care, children with incarcerated parents in general that have mothers that are incarcerated, a lot of times that is where their children are with their grandmothers. And so being able to connect, that's a way. Like, right. So if you are doing research and you're thinking about the question that she raised, think about, wait a minute, okay, maybe I should be studying or looking at this issue around women. And then that is a way where you can potentially bring in grandparents as an avenue to just give, voice to and experience to.
So have you, you're the researchers, can we talk a little bit about qualitative research and have you thought about doing a focus group of legislative staffers? But just the use of qualitative research and because you got the voices of the affected as well. I'll let you
Yeah, I think Paha and I'm gonna partner on that.
I love that idea.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good idea, so I think, for a long time, a lot of the qualitative research which is, I think, is getting a little more respect as kind of focused on kind of talking to, I think, those directly impacted by this particular issue. And really, I don't think any research exists around kind of talking to, policy players around their kind of feel and interactions with us as research and with folks with lived experience. So I think that's a really good idea and something to really think about.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm curious what prompted the idea. Maybe we could talk about it later, but I think it could help us understand what people's views are, what their values are around this area, what their biases are in this area. Because at the end of the day, no matter how good the research, I mean, I'm going out on a limb here because policy is not my expertise, it's yours. But at the end of the day, it is people that are proposing legislation and deciding whether to vote yes or no. And that's influenced by the kinds of things that we could probably learn about from doing qualitative work with them. And then more broadly, qualitative work is critically important. As I try to teach my students, there's nothing magical about quantitative research, right? There are many biases that come into play when it comes to quantitative work. You decide what to measure, you decide how to measure it, you decide what kinds of analyses or methods to use. All of that is a form of qualitative work. And so qualitative has to be part of any research that we do. It's another tool, but it has to be part of the package always.
Just two things. One, back to the grandparent issue. On the work that we have been doing over the years on the inside, our original agreement with the Department of Corrections is that there are many different people that play parental roles in the lives of children who have incarcerated parents. So we insisted from the beginning that the system include a person who had been in a parental role, whether that was a biological parent, a boyfriend, an uncle, an aunt, a grandfather, grandmother, whatever, so I just think advocating for the fact that families there's all kinds of constellations for families and they need to be involved. On this front, on the qualitative work, I'm wrapping up a book right now with a retired faculty member from here, Kevin Haggerty, and it focuses on professional youth mentoring. So mentors who are paid to be mentors. And we've been studying a program for almost 20 years that includes many children with incarcerated parents in the program. But anyway, it's a quantitative study, but along the way, we've done qualitative work that's really informed what we're doing. And in this book, we have new qualitative research that includes interviewing young adults who were mentored by this 12-year-long program, interviewing mentors who were part of the program, interviewing caregivers of the kids who were in the program, interviewing executive directors and program directors, and then interviewing board members. And so that's, I think, adding all of those different points of view in the context of this particular study I'm talking about has really been helpful in us to understand the findings. And since, I don't know, maybe 2000, I was trained as a quantitative researcher, had no qualitative training at all. But I realized early on that gave me a whole bunch of blinders. And so since that time, I've always combined qualitative work with quantitative work, and it's always been helpful. So I definitely think that identifying the groups that you think are most important to whatever issue you're studying, which Kevin and I tried to do, and then going out and talking to each of those groups is really important.
Try to make it quick. Hi, I'm John. I'm a researcher on Dr. Willis and Dr. Day's team. And so this discussion has been really great. I think that there's one final little piece to it at the end when you come to the evidence-based research stuff that is a snag point for me. It's actually tying it back to the funding based on that evidence-based designation. So my understanding and the way that works is you go through clearinghouses, and my experience with those clearinghouses is that they are not very easy to work with, and they're really slow. And there's a lot of frustration from every single person I've ever met that works with them. Do you have any ideas on how to make change related to that? Maybe it's the lobbying work that Dr. Day was talking about, but I don't know. Yeah.
It's definitely the lobbying work. I think all of us are powerless to the. And this is a personal issue for us right now. But I definitely think it's I think a lobbying issue. Clearly, Clearinghouse, I think, currently is as a result of federal funding, and is kind of being operated and overseen by a federal office. And so I think individuals who potentially have the ear of congresspersons who are kind of drafting these bills. And then I think also making relationships with individuals within the executive branch offices that can more appropriately interpret how, you know, these things should be carried out. And so I think it's definitely, I think, beyond us. It's folks who definitely have more interaction with Congress and the executive branch that can kind of really help to make that particular system a lot more user-friendly, let's say. Thanks, John. Go ahead.
I do think that having been around the block for a while now, I've been part of efforts like long ago in the US Department of Education. There was a safe and drug-free schools kind of clearinghouse that I was a reviewer for, and a lot of work went into it, and it was around for a while, and then it kind of disappeared. And, you know, there was a Maryland Blueprints thing I was involved with, same thing. And we came up with all these ideas, and then they kind of go away. So part of the issue I've seen over the years is that some of these clearinghouses, the institutional knowledge about them just goes poof. I was in Germany a couple of years ago, visiting this group that had funded me for about 5 years working in Central America. And I found out that all the work that we did somehow got lost from the archives, and everybody I was talking to there had no idea that they had funded this work, you know? So anyway, there's knowledge that that accrues and gets put into these clearinghouses, as frustrating as they are. But I think part of the issue is figuring out how to not lose that record, you know, like having to go into the Raiders of the Lost Ark archives or something, you know, you can't find it.
On that note, thank you all so much for hanging out with us a little bit over time. Thanks to our amazing panelists, Ebony, Mark, Kimberly, and Faja. So thank you all so much. What next steps?
Since we're running just a little bit over, and then we will start back 3:05 sharp. That was
Why you gotta-
Thank you. Is everything that I can
We brought together the criminal justice section, all of them.
Here, real quick.
You want to keep your name tag?
Section down. You tell us.
I haven't seen it since very long, because that's new.
Number one, right? And we had one question.
Yeah.
Last,
Be on the
let's
other
say, do another.
You'll,
There were
that's what
16
you want. You'll get there, I promise.
that were based off of our research, only because.
Well, you need to say that in the next.
Yeah. So we spent time just listening to what they knew. Because what we found out by that do a better job pushing research around. They do a better job. Really? And they basically push the information. And say, here your policy. On a 3x5 car, they run it. But there was nobody pushing there with born agenda. You got the same voice. Very interesting. You know, but yeah, that's
That's why we're here, man, you know.
Oh, wait. I want to finish also. Yeah.
We're gonna be get started in 2 minutes. We're gonna be get started in 2 minutes. Okay, Jenny, just to let you know, I'm gonna be putting you up on the big screen in just a second.
Anytime? Okay, perfect.
And then you just want to hand it back to me.
All right, so thank you all. I know this is a long day, but I hope you leave inspired and excited and understanding that part 2 of our story. So you heard the story from Mark. You know, this Parenting Inside Out project started because he was a humble researcher who came to the community and showed up when the community asked for help. That's lesson 1 that I want you to take away from today's conversation. I think one of the other things that's really important that you heard today is that centering lived expertise. There was no way we were going to engage in this conversation without having our lived experts center the work. And as you heard from our lived experts, they're the ones who knock people's socks off. They're the game changers. And as you heard from our lived experts, they are grounded in what is needed in community. And so that second lesson is listen to those lived experts. They have really good ideas of what works, what doesn't work. So now that we've done the research in panel 1 and that research was grounded from those lived experts and those other critical stakeholders, and we have our researchers bringing and showing up with humility, understanding that the best use of researcher time is to listen and be grounded in the field. So the next part of this work is that translation task. From now that the research is done, how do we engage in translating that research so it can be used for impact, right? All of us researchers in the room, we all want to be impact scientists. We've been hearing more and more through the Society for Social Work Research and other places the importance of how do we bring the field forward. And one of the wonderful things about social work is that we are an applied profession. So impact matters to social work. And so how can we be good stewards in thinking about maximizing impact in all of what we do? And so this next panel is really focused on giving you tips and tricks of the trades, utilizing the experts here to help you understand the researchers in the room, how you can engage in a more meaningful way in not just conducting the research, but being able to translate it so that you can maximize impact to improve outcomes for children and families. And so on that note, like in panel 1, I'm going to have each of our panelists introduce themselves. And this panel really has an intentional design of how do you translate research at the state level? And then we have conversations about how do you translate it at the federal level. And so you're going to hear both of those stories today. So I want to start off our panel talking about the state work. We are moving into an interesting time. And in more conservative climates federally, the work happens at the state level. So I want to start focusing at the state. And so I am super excited that Rebecca Goodvin has partnered with us to be on our panel from the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. And so I'm really excited for her to start us off today and to introduce what the organization is and what they do and how they have impact in the state of Washington.
Thanks, Angelique, and thanks again for inviting me to join this conversation. I really am thrilled to be here. So as Angelique said, I'm from the Washington State Institute for Public Policy. Sometimes people say WISIP, because that is less of a mouthful somehow. But just really briefly about myself, I am a developmental psychologist and was at Western Washington University in the psych department for about 9 years before moving to WISIP. And I made that move in large part because I am kind of a community-oriented, action-oriented developmental psychologist. And just as we heard in the first panel, it's really hard to do that kind of work as an individual in an academic position without infrastructure for doing that kind of work. And so about 9 years ago, I made a move to the Washington State Institute for Public Policy in Olympia. So now I'll tell you a little bit about WISIP. So we are a nonpartisan legislative research organization. We were created by the Washington State Legislature in the early 80s. And we were created specifically for the purpose of doing rigorous, practical research at the direction of the legislature and for the legislature as an audience. And so the legislators and their staff are our primary audience. And so we work in a number of different policy areas. Adult criminal justice, juvenile justice, and child welfare are a few of the big ones where we get a lot of assignments. But we also work in public health and education. And so I think the importance of kind of the cross-cutting nature of that work is really clear. We have an interdisciplinary team with economists, psychologists, public health folks, MPAs. So the interdisciplinary nature of our team is really important, I think. There are kind of two big things that I want to say about WISIP's role that I think are really important before I talk just a little bit more about the kinds of work that we do in this introduction. So the first thing is that we, as we were designed to do, we answer the questions that the legislature wants us to answer. So almost all of our research assignments come to us in legislation. So either in a policy bill that has a study kind of embedded within it. Sometimes the bill is just for a study for WISIP. Sometimes legislators pass a bill implementing and funding a new program, and they attach a study to that. So they embed evaluation into the implementation and funding piece. Sometimes we get kind of surprise studies in the budget at the end of the legislative cycle, and that's always fun. We often are asked to consult with staff, with legislative staff, or with legislators on the language in the legislation that's specifically related to our assignment. So that can be really helpful for kind of finessing, streamlining some feasibility issues or scope issues, because study assignment that's initially written in legislation isn't always 100% clear or 100% feasible, given what we know on the research end about the nature of the data available or a realistic timeline for a new evaluation study, things like that. So we consult on language for assignments, but beyond that, we really don't make a statement on policy bills. And that leads to, one more thing I wanted to say about that. I want to make clear, we consult equally with nonpartisan legislative staff and caucus staff. We work a lot with the Office of Program Research folks on the House side and Senate Committee Services on the Senate side. And they're probably our closest partners in working with the legislature. Okay, so then the other piece that I think is really important to communicate about WSIP and our role is that because we are nonpartisan and the intent is that we are neutral, we don't advocate for particular policies or programs or legislation. We don't push for any kinds of specific policy solutions. And as sometimes with my other hat on as a community-oriented developmental psychologist, I have to put that hat aside and wear my WSIP hat in terms of being neutral on policy issues and particular bills. But that piece of things, that piece of this role is really important to why the legislature asks for our work and trusts our work across a number of different policy areas, is that they trust that kind of non-advocacy stance and the objective stance. So moving into just a little bit about the types of assignments that we receive at WSIP, we do a number of different kinds of things. So the legislature asks us to do a lot of evidence reviews and meta-analyses, so reviewing and synthesizing, sometimes like a qualitative synthesis, sometimes a quantitative synthesis with meta-analysis, the original research that other folks are doing to evaluate programs and policies. We do some kind of descriptive or landscape analysis work, either within Washington, kind of deep dive of a particular area, or sometimes we get asked to look at state review or policy reviews in other states. And then we also do a number of outcome evaluations. So when the legislature wants to know, how is this program or policy that we have implemented in this state impacting the people in this state, they can ask us to do that. And so the time horizon associated with those different kinds of assignments really varies. So evidence reviews can happen much more quickly. Outcome evaluations, there are all sorts of time considerations involved. This can take a little bit longer, which is challenging when policy windows are short for action. So just want to put that out there. I have lots of thinking around time and timing that I've been doing. But I want to highlight two other, two kind of unique components to our work, I guess. So one is that WSIP is kind of known in the legislature and in the state agencies for the inventories of evidence-based practices that we do. And we've been asked to do this by the legislature in a number of different policy areas. It's kind of like a local clearinghouse, but a little bit different. And so just as an example, we were assigned in 2023 by the legislature to update our inventory of evidence-based practices for the adult criminal justice system. And the specific ask for this assignment was to take a look at the programs that Department of Corrections was operating and offering to incarcerated individuals in their prison facilities in the state, and then review the evidence for those programs and make a statement about whether those programs were evidence-based, and whether those programs in particular were having an impact on recidivism for individuals in the state. And so we approached this in a pretty systematic way, looking across all of the programs that we could identify in Washington state facilities. I will tell you, we found about 60 programs, different programs in the programs data from 2014 to 2023. Only about half of them we could identify any evaluation work at all, looking at the effectiveness of those programs. My connection to the Parenting Inside Out program is that Parenting Inside Out was one of the programs we identified in the program's data. We were able to review Dr. Eddy's evaluation of the program and include that as a research-based program on our inventory. We also know that Washington State is in the process of doing a follow-up evaluation of Parenting Inside Out, and we eagerly await the results of that evaluation. It wasn't ready to include last year, so we only have the one evaluation that Dr. Eddy's team completed. So anyway, that's my connection to the Parenting Inside Out program. And what I want to highlight there is that the legislature, they're removed from kind of the implementation of those programs, but they wanted to know what programs are happening and is there any evidence that they are effective for the purposes they're intended to achieve. The second piece that I wanted to bring up was that WISIP is sometimes known for its benefit cost analysis work, and that's something the legislature looks for when we are able to make a statement as a part of many of our different kinds of assignments, when we are able to make a statement about the long-term kind of economic returns that might be expected from investing in a program, that can be a really meaningful piece of information for them. Sometimes people talk about that in terms of a benefit cost ratio. So for example, for every dollar the state invests in X program, we can expect a $10 return over the lifetime. So I wanted to highlight that because it's kind of one of the unique things we're known for, and it can be an important part of the conversation. It's not the only important part of the conversation. I feel that very strongly. But we have heard from advocates and program folks that it can be useful for their conversations with policymakers and with funders to be able to talk about not just what it costs to invest in a program, but also to be able to talk about like, what could we potentially expect as a return from programs as well. So I think I'll leave it there and pass things back to you. Thank you.
Awesome. I just want to call out these golden nuggets that you're hearing to make sure that you have these takeaways. And one of those things that WISIP talked about is this need in social welfare research to be thinking about cost benefit analysis. I know I do intervention research, on a lot of different federal grants, and many of the Children's Bureau grants I work on require cost benefit analysis as a component. And so I would say for the social workers in the room, make friends with your economist colleagues. And we have some beautiful, amazing economists in the room. And I know I have a great benefit of partnering with folks like Margaret Kalinsky, who has just, taken my research to the next level in terms of understanding the importance of that and that particular research in being able to have the evidence that you need to support sustainability long past an intervention at a pilot site level. And I know there's a few other folks in the room who also have had the benefit of those partnerships. And I want to encourage folks as we get into the Q&A portion of this event to tell those stories. That's what today is about. Come to the mic and tell those stories, chat those stories in the chat. And we'll be able to continue those conversations in the networking today. And so I'm just super, super excited to have those conversations with you. I now want to transition only temporarily because our state conversation has only just begun into talking a little bit more about our national policy translation work because we are focused today on this monumental piece of child welfare legislation that literally just got signed on the day before Christmas Eve. And so I want to bring in some of our federal think tank leaders, including staffers who work in Congress. And so now I want to give the mic to Santos Marino from Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal's office, who's going to talk about some of the groundbreaking research that office has led, and to tell the story of where those ideas came from and how you as researchers can support staffers in pulling those ideas together.
Thank you. So my name is Santos Moreno. I am a former community organizer. Started off my career on the south side of Chicago with my work focused on advocating for immigrants and also engaging with youth that were either in gangs or in the process of leaving gangs. I've worked on campaigns, whether that be presidential, local, congressional, interpreted for the International Rescue Committee, and came over to the Congresswoman's office from the Washington State Senate in May of 2023. And my role in the Congresswoman's office is essentially working on issues of youth welfare, K-12 education, healthcare, housing, immigration, veterans work, and some other things. And I'm essentially responsible for engaging community partners and stakeholders that work across those issue areas, hearing what their concerns and priorities are, whether that be operationally or as it pertains to policy. And also, which I find one of the most important components of the position, is to identify and consolidate sources of federal revenue that can assist these community partners in continuing operations and in some cases expanding their operations. And one of the really important pieces of legislation that I got to work on is a bill called the Families Act, which is the Finding Alternatives to Mass Incarceration, Lives Improved by Ending Separation Act. And this bill essentially would allow federal judges to divert parents and caregivers from incarceration into a comprehensive program that would better serve them, their families, and society by offering resources, services, and training to meet their unique needs. This legislation is modeled after successful programs in the states of Oregon and Washington that have already kept hundreds of families together and have been vital to reducing recidivism. The Families Act establishes a diversion program that includes education, employment, services, parenting skills, mental health and substance abuse services, and it also addresses basic needs of the individual and their family by connecting them with healthcare, housing assistance, and other public benefits. And to be eligible under the Families Act, an individual must be pregnant, a parent of a minor child, a caregiver for a minor child, or other minor relative, a caregiver for an individual with disabilities, or a caregiver with an elderly family. When considering eligibility for the Families Program, courts will consider the individual's significant parental or caregiver responsibilities, their history of justice involvement, the safety of their family, and a family impact statement describing the impact that a person or that a prison sentence would have on the family of the defendant. Judges, ideally under the Families Act, will receive training in implementing the Families Program, including training on trauma-informed decision-making, domestic violence, child abuse and neglect, and mental health. And our office's position on this issue is that America's broken criminal justice system disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities, which often ends up in breaking up families and adding to our country's mass incarceration problem. And we believe that it's time for us and our justice system to finally prioritize policies that deliver humane alternatives and shrink the world's largest prison population. And this is why the Congresswoman and our office proudly introduced the Families Act, because we believe that children should not be subjected to trauma and uncertainty caused by a broken criminal justice system, which at times needlessly splits up families. And for too long, criminal justice reform has primarily focused on solely the incarcerated, leaving the children and families of the incarcerated as an afterthought. And the Families Act addresses this oversight by offering an encouraging example of moving beyond traditional forms of punishment, which inflict years of needless trauma on children, and instead explores alternatives to keep families together. And through this legislation, we believe that we can invest in the next generation and provide millions of children with the opportunity to thrive despite their parents' or family members' convictions. And at the moment, we're currently in the process of building out our legislative team and waiting on committee assignments. So the reintroduction of the Families Act by our office is currently pending, but whether it's our name at the top of the bill or any other champion's name at the top of the bill, this is a piece of legislation that we'll continuously advocate for and support. And from a research and policy end, I guess a suggestion for researchers that want to get in to engagement with their federal offices. I think there are a series of certain technical or interpersonal competencies that can really help out with that, whether that's gaining a deeper understanding of the policymaking process or building rapport and forming those relationships with congressional offices, senatorial offices. I know during the first panel, someone mentioned the executive branch as well, which is incredibly important. And really maximizing that time that you all have with them. Researchers generally engaged in few interactions with policymakers, which could limit the extent to which empirical evidence is used to guide public policy, and consequently, the potential effectiveness of public policies in improving community well-being. That's all I've got to say on that.
So many of these ideas that Congress members introduce come from their constituents, from our folks who are in the field. And so one of those folks in the field is researchers. So the question is how do you get to the table and Santos, from your experience, I would love for you to just talk a tad bit more about your experience engaging with researchers, or with researchers specifically on this bill or other bills, on how you've incorporated that voice into that work.
I think it really depends on the member of Congress or the senator that you might be engaging with. And something that my boss is personally very fond of is like metrics and that quantitative data. But we also, of course, part of my job is in taking the qualitative data as well, and hearing those personal stories from constituents, because some of the things that we like to hear about most is how is X legislation going to affect this community. So if folks potentially also wanted to explore the idea of conducting research at a hyper-local level so that policymakers can understand how a certain piece of legislation will affect folks within their jurisdiction directly, I think that would be incredibly useful for myself as a staffer to have those figures in front of me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So another critical stakeholder group that we just barely tipped the hat to is our coalition leaders and our lobbyist colleagues to help support research translation. And so on that note, I would like to introduce one of the most influential coalition leaders in my experience of doing work at the federal level, which is Jennifer Pokaempner, who leads the Transition Age Youth Coalition. And she can talk a little bit more about who those members are and the strategies that they utilize, and the work that particular coalition played in getting the 4B reauthorization across the finish line is absolutely amazing. And this is one of many examples that coalition has supported and has seen new policy come to fruition. So thank you, Jennifer. I'm excited for your story.
Great, and thanks everyone for letting me join virtually. I know it's awkward to have someone on the screen, but I do appreciate it. As Angelique said, my name is Jenny Pokaempner. I'm an attorney the Youth Law Center, we do focus on, we do advocacy related to young people impacted by the child welfare and juvenile justice systems and their families. The strategies we use are really multiple: legislation, litigation, education, training, and as Angelique mentioned, coalition building. And I can't think of any of those strategies in which we don't use research. And also thinking about how research has become increasingly more vital to all the work we do. At Youth Law Center, some of the areas I focus on, as Angelique mentioned, transition age youth, which would be young people between about age 14 and mid-20s, 26 or so. A lot of the work we do really does focus on helping or really advocating that what we know about developmental research, adolescent development, is really translated into policy. And also members of my office also do focus on the younger age groups and how developmental science also impacts, but that's really has been critical to so much of our work. And some of the other research that's been really impactful is the research related to transition age youth in foster care, what the outcomes are, and looking kind of near term and long term. I think, I'm happy to give some examples of kind of the impact of research, but I do think this panel is really timely because I do think, particularly at the federal level, but also in some of your states, maybe not Washington State, but some of the states of people who might be online, I think that the need for different ways to be persuasive in policy is going to have to expand, and we're going to have to be much more creative. And in a lot of ways, I do think that research is never more important because it does create an opportunity to bring people together in a more bipartisan way. And I totally give consideration to what was said about in the earlier panel that some people will take research and throw it away, and research can be framed in different ways. I do think that it's been pretty impactful in child welfare, and that it at least gives you a ground to potentially get some bipartisan support. And I think, again, at the federal level, definitely, and I think in our states as well, unfortunately, I do think advocates are prepared for a lot of things to be under attack. And for a lot of, even though a lot of the progress we've made has been very slow, a lot of those things being eroded, both in terms of programs and potentially rights. So I do think being able to partner with researchers and really point to the effectiveness of programs, but also look at different ways of return on investment for a young person and their communities, but also looking kind of largely and unfortunately having to think about some of the polarizing language we see at the national level, really thinking about how to be very strength-based in the way we look at social policy, and using research to frame how really we do when we support young people and their families, we really do support communities, but being able to look at that in terms of workforce and other elements that we see becoming more dominant, I think, in the political framework now. Definitely for B, one of the roles that, as Angelique mentioned, that I play as a chair on our Transition Age Coalition, which is made up of a lot of federal and some state advocates, and really been able to hone in on the different ways policy at the federal level, but also state impacts that group of transition age youth, and tried to have a focal point on that group while understanding that they are embedded in families and communities and trying to connect those issues as well. I think that, research for 4B really, as the last panel mentioned, was really influential for the section related to studies related to the connection between young people in foster care and parents who are incarcerated. Another area that was really impactful is a lot of the work that Chapin Hall and a lot lot of people have done on the impact of direct cash transfers really did impact one of the two of the provisions in the Title 4B bill. One, allowing 4B funds to be used for limited amounts of direct cash transfer for non-recurring kind of crisis and issues related to housing that could really keep a family out of the system. And also requiring that states look at their laws and their training to make sure that that removals are not done for reasons related to poverty. Those are two really impactful provisions. Implementation, of course, will be the test of if those provisions are really going to have that impact. But I think the research of Chapin Hall and again others has been so important in really saying a lot of times financial resources are the issue. And if you address those, you can do really effective prevention work. That's not the only thing you can do, but that's very impactful. So I'm really excited to talk and have more details or more questions to the panel about different ways to work together. But again, I don't see our advocacy work being that successful if it's not connected to research. And again, I think it is even more important today and in the coming couple of years more than ever.
Thank you, Jennifer. And to connecting the importance of research, how many researchers actually participate in the coalition?
So, I mean, Angelique, you're one of the key researchers in the coalition. We have several people from Chapin Hall, and then we do have, I think, a series of other researchers that probably do not do as intense research as you and Chapin Hall does, but do smaller types of research. Today, and Lance, who's in the audience, we did have one of our coalition members is Sarah Berger Gonzalez from Chapin Hall, who's done a lot of research on direct cash transfers plus services for transition age youth. And it was a really great conversation because she's sharing her research, but to that kind of point of kind of the interchange is me as an advocate. I mean, I don't want to drive your research. I want your research to, drive the advocacy I do. But what was nice there is that she is asking advocates and other service providers on the ground questions about kind of what metrics should they be collecting? Are there ones that would be really critical for us as advocates to know so that we're not changing kind of the design or what the root cause and those kinds of things, because they've done a great job of really doing participatory and collaborative researching with young people and stakeholders. But it is nice to have this loop of us saying, are there ways, because one of the research is really showing both for young people and families that unconditional direct financial assistance not only is effective in improving outcomes, but it does change the dynamic between a service provider and a young person or an older person. And engagement in a lot of our child welfare services is sometimes challenging for older youth. So being able to say to Sarah, can you look at, as you're doing your research, like, is there any metrics for showing like kind of engagement, like youth engagement in services in the program, or and her thinking about, is that something that collection of data could be done? And then is that something that we can help translate not just into advocating for direct cash transfers, but, I'm really interested in, as I think Angelique, you are, of like how to make sure that the service provision and things that youth are offered are really engaging, are respectful, give them a lot more choice. And if that's something like she can help as part of her research, being able to have that back and forth, I think is really helpful. And then us being able to know what the research, what's happening. One of our interests always is, okay, you're doing research in New York City and San Francisco. We need some other localities and states that aren't, and we work in California, so I'm not at all critiquing that, but we need some example, and they have them. They're also doing work in Minnesota. So it's great to have that kind of in interchange. And again, like I think we've learned a ton from you, Angelique, and also bringing in like so many of your talented students to really help weigh in on the policy discussions.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think one of the questions many researchers in the room is, when am I going to have time to do this? Y'all, I have students as field interns. I recruit 2 to 3 a year, and it just increases your capacity to be engaged in community. Can't emphasize that enough. So thank you so much, Jennifer. And I know you'll have additional wisdom to share during the Q&A portion. One of the other things I want to point out that the coalition that Jennifer leads has a lot of lived expertise voice in that coalition. And I think that's another powerful feature of that coalition that makes it so impactful. Is that, we have the faces and the experiences that help guide the research questions that are asked, and the direction the coalition takes and Jennifer is, again, one of the most humble people I've ever met in terms of her humility, and her impact is absolutely incredible. And so understanding, so far we've talked a lot about the congressional side of policymaking, but being engaged in the administrative component of policymaking is also really important. And on that note, Dr. Pettis has done an incredible amount of work in both state and federal government with the administrative branch in terms of her research and expertise. And so I think that's another really important part of the conversation that we haven't discussed yet. And I'm super excited to hear Dr. Pettis's story in that way.
Thank you. Oh, it is on. Wow. So excited. I didn't expect that to work. So good afternoon, almost evening. I don't know. I was just noticing it's really dark on this side of the room and it's really light. So I'm like, I'm going to be watching and seeing if you guys are closing your eyes over here. But anyway, I am the CEO of a nonprofit translational research firm. It's a national firm, and its overall focus is on well-being development and equity throughout the criminal, legal, and justice system. The way that our model works at WEI is that we come alongside our practitioner and policy partners to jointly identify some of the biggest challenges facing that partner, and also some of the greatest opportunities to solve their problem, not only in a data-driven way, but a data-driven way that is prioritizing equity in the experience of the policy or practice change, as well as prioritizing looking to really the future scape of what's possible versus doing, kind of smaller tweaks around the edges. So we, in our partnerships, are thinking about impact, change, sustainability from the very beginning. One of the statistics that was just barely mentioned earlier that I wanted to bring back up again is about this time lag. Some people call it the research odyssey, but this time lag of scientific discovery to adoption in the field. So the average statistic is 17 years. I would say that most of us researchers recognize that all brilliant ideas actually come from the field. Whether it's a practitioner, an advocate, a lobbyist, policymaker, individuals and communities with lived experience. We don't often, as researchers, give people outside of the researcher credit for that idea, but oftentimes if we're thinking about the 17-year odyssey, if you just think back 17 years, it was most likely the practitioners and the policy advocates that had started raising questions about a given area. So the approach that that my nonprofit takes, WEI, and also that we're increasingly seeing philanthropic and federal funders be interested in, is really how to shorten that gap significantly using a feedback loop between researchers, practitioners, and policy partners. And when I say practitioners, that's a very broad swath of individuals, including advocates. So is to really think about this engagement like it's a feedback loop, and to acknowledge that knowledge development is incremental and policy is incremental. So if we as researchers let go of this desire to solve an entire problem at once, we can get much more on the cadence of our policy partners that are oftentimes under a significant amount of pressure to solve a problem immediately, and they need and are interested and want some kind of data to help inform their decision. And we as researchers are so worried about getting to the end of this 10-year study that we're not looking at any of the learnings in the interim that could actually help inform the increment of policy development that we're at. So that's something that we, as an organization, try to be very conscious of and learn how to have the data that we're collecting inform decisions in the system that we're researching as we go. It's a lot of work, by the way, and it is not reinforced at all in university systems for sure, which was an impetus for, I ran 2 different research centers across 2 different university systems, and ultimately decided that I couldn't be as nimble as I wanted and move as fast as I wanted, which was trying to keep up with the policymakers that were running circles around us. So I moved my research center out into a nonprofit firm, and I don't think that's the solution. All the faculty in the room, I'm not suggesting that, and thank you that Dean Spencer's not in here right now. I'm not saying leave. It's just the reason why that I did it. But I do think I'm excited to hear about what's happening in Wisconsin, that universities do want to maintain their relevance in communities and are looking for strategies to do that, which I think is really important. And I'm hoping that this conversation contributes to as well. I did want to say 2 more things, no, 3, a bunch of more things. I'm going to talk fast. So I did want to say, in addition to the feedback loop, what it helps to promote is another issue that came up during the question and answer section on panel 1, is this notion of implementation of policy and then really understanding whether the policy is operating as intended. So I would say another really important part of this feedback loop notion is that once legislation is passed, that's fantastic, right? But then there is this even heightened need to have this feedback loop going on between researchers and all the different system actors that may be implementing the legislation, because the legislation too can be refined, right? And this is something that research versus lots of perceptions can help to do. And we're hoping with that was because we have advanced knowledge of this legislation coming out, helping to support families that are involved in both systems. I think it would be really great if we put the expectation at the outset that we expect to monitor this and continue to evaluate what families' experiences are like with targeted resources towards this overlap. And so the final piece that I did want to say, let me see if I'm going to, oh no, I'm not, it's not the final piece, it's almost the final piece. The final piece that I did want to say too, what's so exciting about this gathering today, but also the legislation, is that it is a nod towards the fact that our country is starting to acknowledge the involvement in the criminal justice system is not an individual experience. It is a family systems experience, and every element of that family is impacted. It's fantastic that that is finally being acknowledged, because that is the future scape of how we think about how our criminal, legal, and justice system interacts with our communities and family systems, but also how we think about how we want it to look differently in the future. The final thing I did, and this really is the final thing I did want to say, is that in terms of research and policy action in state versus federal, and my involvement with the administration at the federal level, they were really, especially with the Office of American Innovation a few years ago, is they were very focused on learning from the states to think through some changes that needed to be happening in the federal system, as well as potential federal legislation like in the criminal justice system, which was the First Step Act. They were very much reaching out to teams of researchers, my team, as well as others, to say, how quickly can we learn about what's going on in the states and what we need to do? And vice versa, states are learning from the feds a lot too. So I think as we talk about these different policy level stakeholders, that we do need to recognize that they are very much watching each other too. So that's all I'm going to say for a second. Don't, Sarah, I'm coming back to you. So,
Yep. One last thing, because we know the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work Policy supports social workers who want to be more actively engaged in the political arena, whether they are supporting students to work as staff in legislative offices or supporting social workers to run for office themselves. I think another piece of the pie for all of us to think about as researchers is that that there are opportunities to provide service in the administrative branch as well to influence policy in terms of writing guidance, or how do you ensure that legislation that you worked so hard that we've talked about is being implemented in a good way, right? A policy is only as good as how well it's implemented. And so that policy monitoring function that researchers can play is important. And that we can do it sitting in our university desks. But I'm also going to like put a pitch out there for the researchers in the room to consider how to spend a sabbatical, because all of us will have the opportunity to engage in sabbaticals. And this year I happen to be on sabbatical from the university, and I'm splitting my time half-time between the National Institute of Health and the Commissioner's Office with the Administration for Children, Youth, and Families. And I can tell you it's been an unbelievable experience so far in terms of the influence I have gotten to have in my short time of being there and developing policy guidance and bringing research to the table, both my own and my colleagues' research, who I know that is, and making sure that's used in policy guidance development. And that the other plug in terms of how do you engage sitting in the university side is that there are calls for reviewing in the federal registrar. And I think we get those alerts and researchers ignore those alerts. Please, please, please don't ignore those alerts. That is your time to use your voice and your expertise as a researcher to influence how policy guidance is written. And so I just wanted to add that as another tip and trick for you all to think about an opportunity you all already have to influence policy writing at the federal level. On that note, I do want to move to our moderated section of this discussion, and I am asking our panelists some questions, but I can tell you when I was listening to the moderation side, like I was like, oh, I want to answer that question too. I want you all to feel like if you have something really great to contribute, come up to the mic during this discussion and build on the story that we're generating today. And so I just want you to feel empowered to do that. This is all about networking and sharing our expertise. And many of you were invited to the room because you have expertise in this area that you align really well with a lot of the panelists that are here and can build on this discussion. So I want to invite you very directly to do so. I want to start off with a question for Rebecca. And Rebecca really helped us understand the uniqueness of what's in Washington State and this unique feature resource that exists to help support policy translation. And I think WISIP has provided some documents for you all to look at. I think they were on the registration table. And so please take those, because they're WISIP is a tried and true model of how we can translate our research successfully in ways that policymakers want to hear it. So it's not just doing the research, as we have to be able to have that conversation in a way that supports policymakers in the way that they need, so that they can move quickly on the decisions that they're pressured to move in. I also want to point out that when Rebecca did her presentation, she talked about WISIP, and it's very unique and novel, and not every state has a WISIP. So my question to you, Rebecca, is in states who don't have the luxury of a WISIP, how can you encourage the other university professionals in the room to understand how they can use their role to provide support to their state legislators to do this work? And what did we do before WISIP existed, right? It hasn't been here forever. So let's talk about that.
Great. Thanks for that. And just really quickly to add, I forgot to talk about this in my opening remarks, but I did bring some copies of a few of our executive summaries. So just like a one-page executive summary that really is, they are intended to communicate directly with policymakers and with legislative staff to summarize the key points of our research studies. So we do, of course, write long research reports with sometimes even longer technical appendices that none of the legislators are likely to read in their entirety, but to really get the key points of our studies out there. We provide one-pagers, we offer briefings, we offer just informal conversations. And I think that those are really important. So take a look, feel free to follow up with me if you have questions. And so the question that you are posing, Angelique, is how can maybe faculty members who don't have a WISIP, who didn't leave academia to join a WISIP, and feel fortunate to land there, how can they partner? And I think one other thing that kind of to transition into that answer that I want to say too is I highlighted WISIP's role as nonpartisan, non-advocacy. And that's part of the relationship of trust that WISIP has built with the legislature. That is one piece of the conversation of policymaking. And that's not in any way to take away from the essential nature of advocates and people's stories with lived experience and lobbyists and like all of the different pieces that make up the policymaking process, I think are critical. And so that non-advocacy, nonpartisan piece is one piece of that. That said, I think if you are an individual faculty member in academia, two things come to mind. One is, I feel like we've heard this word a few times today, partnerships. Find partnerships with organizations that maybe already have built relationships of trust with policymakers and their staff. Please remember, you don't have to email or call policymakers directly. Get in touch with their staff. And that's a really important kind of way to start those conversations and building relationships. We work really closely in some cases with staff to understand the problems that legislators are trying to solve, and staff are on the ground working daily with those legislators to offer them options, offer them solutions, offer them ideas. And so when you are connected to those staff members and they think, oh, Rebecca at WISIP is a resource here, or at Wisconsin is a resource here, like that's an important relationship. So that's one thing. The second thing that I think is really important is, and WISIP, we answer the questions that the legislature poses to us, directs us to answer. And I have lots of thoughts about timing, so I can't wait to talk more about this later. But um, sometimes by the time legislators give us a study assignment, it's because there's like a critical energy around trying to solve the whole problem or trying to have some policy action. And so I've been thinking a lot about how to get out in front of that some. And I think really like talking with practitioners, talking with people who are um, living the experience, talking with state agencies that are in charge of trying to implement programs and finding out where their pain points are. Looking at what state agencies are putting in their budget requests to the legislature and why they're doing that and what they're getting funded and what they're not getting funded. Can be a really helpful way to get out in front of those questions and critical issues before it gets before it reaches that like critical mass in the legislature. And partnering at that moment, I think, can be really incredibly useful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I know in my first sabbatical, I served Congressman Danny Davis in the U.S. House of Representatives and got to become acquainted with Congressional Research Service and what a nice resource that is for staffers who are working with their members in developing public policy. And I just was really geeking out to learn that there's this CRS version here in Washington State and how awesome that is. But many states don't have that benefit. And so I'm challenging the researchers in the room is how can you talk with your leadership and become that resource, that research, or that your state legislatures go to. Legislation moves much more quickly at a state level than a federal level. And so if you're talking about being an impact scientist, engaging at the state level is an amazing place to be. And so I just want to plant that seed for you. But moving from state to federal, because we are talking about both on this panel, I want to look again to Santos, and we're talking about right moment and how can we maximize our impact. And so one of the things that Santos said was that his office is working on reintroducing this specific bill that he talked about. And it is prior to the introduction where if there's an opportunity to make a change to a bill, that's the time to have the conversation. After it's introduced, an office is not going to rewrite a bill that they've already introduced. So you got to wait 2 years until it goes through the process and dies to really make amendments. And so my question to you, Santos, as I know this bill has, had one legislative life and we're about to see a second legislative life open up on it. Are there certain things, key questions that you've been asked by other offices in trying to achieve co-sponsors that maybe people are like, can you help me understand this before we will agree to be a co-sponsor? Can you talk about what some of those key questions are that you're getting from other offices that researchers could support you in getting answers to, whether it's a lit review, it's not always original research. Sometimes those lit reviews are the most helpful thing to supporting staffers and being able to do and support their work. So I'd love to hear more about that.
At least, so we just kicked off the 119th Congress this week. So in terms of the reintroduction of this particular piece of legislation, whether that's our office or another office that takes care of that, that's currently pending. We're still awaiting to staff up our legislative team, and then we're also awaiting committee assignments. So that will significantly dictate our operating capacity, especially with the new administration to come. We're more than likely going to see ourselves spread pretty thin, mainly given the Congresswoman's position as a voice on immigration and the ranking member at the Immigration Subcommittee and Judiciary. But in terms of what folks come to us asking about, I briefly touched upon it during the elaboration of my introduction, and a lot of it is asking for hyperlocal data pertaining to, well, how will this affect our district? How will this affect our constituents? give us something that we can take back to the community so that they can tangibly see how it will affect their day to day. Not in particular. That isn't typically something that I, at least personally, take into account.
I feel compelled to weigh in because it's directly related to Families Act. So to this point, so the first bill did not pass the Families Act, but there was an appropriation made, and the appropriation should have gone to HHS to distribute, but it's at DOJ, which is problematic, which funded us, the Family-Based Justice Center, and is currently funding, I know Carrie, you just received one of our Family-Based Justice grants, and it's a team to include PAHA that's working on as their grant, they're researching the Washington, which has never been it's not been well researched. And I would say it's so twofold. One, it actually was probably better it didn't pass because the bill as it originally looked a lot like what Washington did. And a lot of the people that were working on it were Washington based. We don't know that Washington's the best model. In fact, there's problems with the Washington model. And we're trying to figure that out as we go. And so what this has done is, 2021, we got to come together and just be funded to actually dive into this. We're not really funded to research, although we've figured out some ways to do that. But other sites have been funded to do the research that's really important, I think, for the upcoming. The other thing is, and we did not advocate for more money, we did get word out. I don't know, we probably work with Isabel Coronado on our team maybe, or others, but there's some lobbyists, again, the lobbyists that are just volunteering. They don't have good they're volunteering their time to keep this going. And the lobbyist gets back and say, okay, if they're gonna reauthorize the bill, what would you change? And it was like, oh, okay, we don't have hard research, but what we do know from all of those early, considering them pilot sites, one is based out of a child welfare agency, a county child welfare agency. There's a couple out of community-based organizations, a couple out of DA's office, a couple out of courts. Is what we can say is there's some really common factors. And I like the list you read off because it makes me think that our suggestions got there because a lot of we need support. We need support. And all what we're hearing from every site, no matter where they're at, is a lot of people start with this, we need parenting classes. It's like, no, people need food. And so what we're hearing from all the sites is we're spending all our time just trying to stabilize a family that's in crisis. And that is really the crux of what we're talking about, right? Of how does your existing crisis and trauma, lead down the way? And so Washington, I would say now we're going to have some great research on Washington. Oregon, when they did their pilot, which I'm going to advocate for pilots because I do think it really helps before you go full in on something, especially if it's innovation, because you can have those unintended consequences. The other thing with a pilot and research is you can throw it into a budget in a state or the feds, and it's not a lot of money, but it's in there and it's funding some research that will actually, and then say, report back. Tell us what you're finding and how should we adapt? And I think you get better policy that way. And you get information from the field, which, sorry, nothing that innovative happens at the federal level. The best they can do is get out of the way. The interesting stuff is in communities and cities and counties. And we should be able to say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Congress, this is what we'd like you to help do on a federal level. Or, hey, we need a lot more money because families are really not doing well right now, and prison should not be the answer. So I just had to tell a little success, because I don't know if the representative knows that or if you know that, but it was a big success. Still is. Hope we keep the money.
I would love to follow up with you on those issues you might have identified with the Washington model, whether we plan to reintroduce or a partner office ends up reintroducing it. I'm sure that they would greatly benefit from that information.
That's what this discussion is. Right time, right place, right conversation. And we are having that today. And I hope that all of you are empowered that this is not a one-day thing, that this is a beginning of a continued conversation with each other and utilizing our collective networks to get done what we need to get done and to be the impact scientists that all of us researchers say we want to be, right? And to recognize and value these amazing folks from the field that are with us today, and that we are more intentional about making that a part of just how we do business as researchers. So on that note, Carrie has worked on a special model, this 5 key model study, and this involved community-based research with community partners and policymakers with the intention of adopting research in real world settings in real time. And I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that to inspire folks that are inspired today and are ready to take this into their own research agendas and to understand how to apply that.
Sure, absolutely. So the 5 key model for reentry and well-being development is basically a model that was developed by a team of researchers, individuals with lived experiences with incarceration and their family members and practitioners, but essentially was in response to the fact that for about 25 or 30 years in this country, we followed one particular approach to thinking about helping people transition out of prison home. It was heavily focused on the risk needs responsivity model, R&R model. And that had been a great model that got us as far as we could go in reentry, and we needed a new approach. So there was a team, this kind of happened in parallel, or not in parallel, consecutively, I guess I would say. There was our team of researchers, practitioners, et cetera, working on trying to come up with something that was more responsive to the conditions of today for reentry. And at the same time, there was a team out of the executive branch in Washington, thinking about Washington, D.C., thinking about, how do we do stuff differently around reentry in the states and at the federal level, or how are states doing it differently and how can we do it differently at the federal level? And they became really interested in supporting, not financially, but supporting in other ways, our ability to do research in multiple states at once, and engaging other executive branch at the state level policy individuals to kind of help the research questions be shaped by policy interest, and also to be receiving every 3 months incremental results from our research. And I've found that both at the state level and the federal level, engaging with the executive branch on policies related to research and doing that feedback loop, it can be quite effective because in terms of at least families involved by the criminal, legal, and justice system, they usually are impacted by multiple agencies responsible for multiple different factors, whether it's Department of Labor, Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes on Health. There's different departments that they're impacted by, and so therefore influencing policy at the departmental level, not just the legislative level, can have a bunch of impact. So that's why we tend to partner with the executive branch more. But I don't know, you get access to a lot of policy all at once.
Thank you, Carrie, so much. Jenny, I would love for you to, take this opportunity now based on responses you've heard from other panelists of digging deeper and understanding the connection of coalition. How can some of the other researchers in the room be engaged? I know you talked about just a few key folks that are actually engaged in the coalition that you're working in, and I know the TAY Coalition is one of many coalitions that are out there. So what advice do you have for researchers in the room on how they can engage more with coalitions to support the research translation process?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to do it. Unfortunately, there's not like one list of all the coalitions, and that would be great. But if there's an area you're interested in, I'm happy to work with people. We have several child welfare related coalitions that are national if people are interested. There's definitely, I'm learning more because again, we're all seeing that the impact of immigration, like it's going to impact child welfare. It's going to impact juvenile justice. and so there are a couple of coalitions that are gearing up to really make sure the impact on kids as well as families is that there's organization around that. So, I mean, I think, it is brainstorming with, Angelique, you mentioned Laurie. Laurie is very connected with a lot of national organizations. And again, I'm happy to brainstorm. We don't always have as many. I think there's been a resurgence, and as many people have seen in a lot of fields, like I think the pandemic pulled a lot of advocacy partners together. And I think it did mean that there are more kind of organized coalitions, but definitely Children's Defense Fund and Child Welfare League of America organizes one that touches on a lot of areas related to child welfare. We do the Take Coalition. We welcome any members. And again, the immigration, and I'm sure we could think of more. There's one that's very focused on kind of child protection. So definitely there are a bunch. And I would also note that for all of them, coalition, I use the word and I always, they work in a lot of different ways. Some are very organized, voting, all sorts of things, very, very formal, but many like ours is more for information sharing and to create an opportunity for members if they want to come together and advocate. So don't be scared when you hear coalition to say, oh, like as Angelique said, I don't have time, or I'm not going to be able to be a voting member. There's a lot of different structures and a lot of different ways to participate. And for some of the members that, we have, I'll say to them, will you be on the coalition? See all the emails, come to the meetings you can, but I want you to be part of this group and the conversations. And a lot of them, particularly researchers who might not be able to attend all the meetings, are like, yes, I can do that. And then we work hard to, really flag for them areas that we really, really need them. So I think that's one way to do it. The other coalition I would mention does have a good number of researchers on it is they're called the ABC Coalition. The ABC stands for, I think, automatic benefit. It might be credit. I'm sorry that I'm not sure what the C stands for, but basically it's a coalition that's been working very hard on expanding the child tax credit and going back to what was in law during the pandemic. And they're a very large coalition. They have, as you all have noted, a very lived experience element and a subgroup of leadership of lived experts. But there are a lot of researchers, and a portion of what they do on their meetings and listserv is share research on how impactful the child tax credit can be at the federal level, but also at the state level. So I'd also recommend that coalition is one that has been really great about being really engaging to lived experience experts, but also to researchers. And I'm happy to brainstorm with people if they're interested in getting involved with a coalition, at least to think about, does it exist already at the federal level, and can we point people in that direction?
Yeah, I have thank you to all the panelists. I had a shout out for WISIP and Rebecca, and then a question, I guess, for Jennifer or anyone else who wants to answer it. It's about cost benefit analysis. And so I was part of a systems assessment of extended foster care here in Washington State. We did in 2023, and we were able to cite your 2021 evaluation where you did a cost benefit analysis, and it was really helpful to include that. And I know that that was really a big part of convincing legislators of some of the policy change that we asked for last year. So thank you so much for doing that. You might not always see the benefit right away, but the results get used, and that was really, really helpful. The question that I have, I think, Jennifer, you commented something to the effect of thinking perhaps differently about return on investment. And so I'm kind of curious to know what factors you might think about in thinking differently about returning on investment, and similarly just around cost benefit analysis. I think for a lot of the things that we're talking about, you could really, if we think about measuring the impact of prevention, and the fact that so many of these system involvement and experiences are not affecting just an individual, but the ripple effects, as we heard from the panel earlier, on other family members and communities. So I'm just curious about an expanded view of return on investment. I'm Emiko Tajima. I'm on the faculty here at the UW School of Social Work, and I direct Partners for Our Children.
And what I was mentioning or referencing is, I think part of what was in, and I agree with you, a lot of states use the who are fighting for extended foster care in their state do point to the WISIP study as one of the research they can use, and certainly it's kind of predated by the Midwest study that really did help with the Fostering Connections bill at the federal level. I think, what I was referring to, which I think some of the cost benefit analysis have done, and as you mentioned, is this kind of ripple effect of how investing in young people and families earlier on, or providing more time in extended foster care has these effects with, like, reduction of homelessness or entrance into the criminal justice system, things that you can quantify. And I think that there have been limitations to the ability for some researchers to be able to do that. And in part, I think that's just the kind of investment of, who has the capacity to do that. And I guess, though, I do think what we were hearing today in the conversation we were having about direct cash transfers was that some lawmakers may not be as impacted by this will help the young person, but they might be more impacted by it will save you this amount of money in terms of impact on the community. And that's what I think they were pointing, that we're going to have to do more of that for some policymakers that, of course, want youth or families to do better, but they want to be able to show that the impact is, on other cost, reduction of other costs. And I think, like, for us as advocates, we want to hold to kind of we think that the benefit of youth is a good enough reason to do that. But that we have to be, I guess, more nimble and more flexible in trying to describe the benefit on a lot of different levels to appeal to different perspectives of lawmakers and policymakers.
Thank you so much. I have my last question I prepared is for all of the panelists to respond to. And this is a similar question to what was asked of a panel one, because I think this is a different group of stakeholders that is going to look at that question a bit differently. And so thinking about Title IV-B reauthorization, which really inspired today's convening, and that is the Protecting America's Children by Strengthening Families Act. One of 16 bills that make up that 4B package is this bill that we've been spending time on today, the Promoting Active Relationships to Enable Nurturing Ties, or the Parent Act, which is focused on demonstration grants. So you'll see this pattern of a lot of what we get past, this idea of try a pilot, let's inspect unintended consequences. So a lot of the way that we can get these things through in terms of building evidence to improve field of practice is intervention research. I don't know by a show of hands how many people in this room actually do and focus on intervention research. I think it's a very small number of academics who wear that hat. And so I'm hoping that today's conversation will inspire you all to think about the value of being an interventionist in terms of identifying as an impact researcher. And I know that there is a lot of different folks who have different feelings about really impressing intervention science as a major piece of how to be an impact scientist. And I know, Eddie, you were crawling out of your skin to add comments. So I'm just going to let you make your comment and then I'll finish asking the question.
So I have been thinking about this during the whole day, so just wanted to say one quick thing. But having seen a lot of these things go forward in this criminal justice space, the typical thing that I've seen with these kind of bills is that when these demonstration grants come out, they'll fund some kind of evaluation. Often it's done by a large firm. And there may be a project or two that actually has a study that would go into one of your meta-analyses, but most of them are process and outcomes for a single group, and they're not going to be useful for WISIP as fully useful as you would want to do a meta-analysis or something like that. So I'm just curious, like in this particular space with this particular grant, for me, what would be as a researcher, but I'm just curious if this would be true for you. And I know you're running out of time, so you probably can't answer this, but when I see money like this, I think what might be useful is a braided funding arrangement with other funders that would come in and help make sure that some of these demonstration projects actually do have designs that will feed into a WISIP analysis or will provide any of you at your level with more information than just, oh, you know, we saw we did this and looks like kind of promising, good, they delivered it, blah, 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 but actually some outcomes that compared to groups, maybe a randomized trial, maybe not, but just kind of push it forward. And so as I read the bill, I'm just kind of worried that that same kind of repetition is going to happen, that rather than producing some comparative data studies that could be used to more strongly advocate. So anyway, that's just a thought that's been running through as I read it before I came and then as I've been listening today. So
The good news is the NOFO has not been written yet. We're just starting the process of writing, and this NOFO is not coming out until spring of 2026. So there's time to provide feedback, which is great. And so I also think that because of the Family First Prevention Services Act, which we tipped our hat to in a very mixed way earlier in our conversation, is that particular legislation is really pushing the Children's Bureau to think differently about what the evaluation requirements are in demonstration projects, for good or for bad. It is changing the way that those expectations are. And RCTs and quasi-experimental designs are becoming, like if you want to get all your evaluation points in the NOFO, that they're really pushing, moving in that direction. Like I said, not all good studies. And when you're talking about special populations, those designs are harder to make work. And I know I do a lot of work in the tribal child welfare space, and those requirements are devastating to tribal communities. So I'm just going to put that out there. And so I want to make sure we don't go too far in that boat and miss opportunities or leave critical populations behind. And we know that tribal folks are actually the most likely to experience incarceration by % of the population. So it's important to acknowledge that data and to make sure that we're building both intervention opportunities and designs that support development of work with state level populations, but also special populations. But it is an important thing to be cognizant of and intentional in building these NOFOs. And I think we have moved because of Family First into that type of thinking. Just hope that we haven't pushed the pendulum too far. I appreciate that conversation. I'm excited to have that conversation more during our networking session. So the final question I have for all of the panelists here now is thinking about this idea of the demonstration grant. And Dr. Eddy kind of, jumped the gun in knowing what my question was before I was going to ask. And that is, the NOFO isn't written yet. Like this bill literally was just signed into law. And this particular piece of legislation is one of 16 pieces of legislation in Title 4B. There is a lot of opportunity for this issue and other child welfare related matters to really influence how the federal government is interpreting the legislation in terms of planning the implementation, of which NOFO development is only one piece. There's also going to be a bunch more federal registrar opportunities that I talked to you about earlier that you can use to influence, you know, how policy guidance or administrative guidance is developed and implemented. So thinking about that, we've talked a lot about the congressional side. I want to, you know, end our conversation really thinking about how can we as researchers be influential in the administrative policy space, in the executive branch at state and federal level, thinking about those partnerships. And I'd love to hear more from WISIP in response to this question of how you work not just with members of Congress, but how does the executive branch, the state executive branch influence, you know, WISIP's reports, and how does that influence look in terms of that partnership as well, if it exists at all? I'm just curious. But, you know, what does, if you had, you know, Commissioner Rebecca Jones-Gaston sitting here, she works until Friday and then she has to leave office, but let's just say she was here right now. What advice would you give her in terms of, as this NOFO is being developed, what are the tips in addition to what Dr. Eddy has raised that should be thought of? And I want my lived experts to think about this. I want my community folks who work in the, you know, county level and state level, as well as researchers, because you all have an important voice to play in terms of what should that thinking be. So you have this opportunity to think about how that NOFO should be constructed, as well as acknowledging, because we have a wonderful staffer in the room today, to say this is what's still left undone, because we always need new ideas for additional pieces of legislation, right? What is left undone that we can offer in terms of nuggets of wisdom that can influence continued policy development in the congressional level, as well as the administrative policy level? We have a huge opportunity right now with 4B reauthorization to influence what this is going to look like and how it's going to play out in community across the country. What are those nuggets of wisdom that we need to be thinking about in terms of policy interpretation and guidance development? So, and this, I want the panelists to start, but then I want my audience folks to be energized and bring the ideas. Okay.
Was it about executive branch in Washington? Yes. Okay, good. There's a lot to think about there. Okay, so although we do receive our direction directly from the legislature, there's of course a lot of intersection between our executive branch agencies and the legislature. The agencies are coming to the legislature with questions and problems, and then they have a champion to put policy programs and evaluations into place. And so sometimes that's how we get our assignments. Sometimes agencies come directly to us and say, we are interested in having you evaluate this program. And we say, okay, we can work on either talking, you can talk with your legislators about that, or sometimes we do contract work. So there is a little bit more kind of bi-directional conversation there, I think, than you see from the outside. One thing that this doesn't directly answer that question, but one thing that I wanted to add just to second Dr. Eddy's comment about how evaluation research in this space is planned, how it happens. That really is something that I've seen in my work at WISIP across different policy areas where there's funding for demonstration projects and evaluation is tied to that funding. It's a required component. It happens quickly because it's required to happen quickly. And so sometimes a process or implementation evaluation is what can be done in that time. Sometimes people are trying best effort to get an outcome evaluation done, but the program isn't fully implemented yet, or it's still, it's still under revision. And so I can't emphasize enough the importance of timing, especially when programs are being scaled up or rolled out for the first time, the timings. You don't want to evaluate a program, not find what you were expecting, and then have like that's the result that stands, and that contributes to the conversation. So timing and being so careful about the timing of outcome evaluations is critical. I also would say that talking with agencies that are implementing programs about options for rolling out in a way that allows the program to be evaluated is critical. So even if you can't get folks on board with doing randomized controlled trials in your state, there are other ways to stagger implementation, to roll implementation out thoughtfully in a way that allows for really rigorous evaluation. And having those conversations early and probably often is a good idea. And then finally, one tricky thing is the timing of outcomes, especially in the criminal justice space. The outcome that legislators are often interested in is recidivism. And recidivism takes a lot of time to monitor, to come to fruition as an outcome that someone can study. And so building in research with other outcomes that policymakers and agency folks can sink their teeth into is really important, so that nobody's waiting, 6, 7, 10, 12 years for any information.
I'm sorry. Well,
Share your wisdom with us.
No, it's not really wisdom. So my husband had a question, and you just made me think of it. You're gonna get up and ask it.
All right.
He's a drug.
We are empowered.
Yeah, my husband, he's a drug and alcohol counselor, and so what he's seeing is saying when his people come through the criminal justice system for inpatient treatment, and their requirement is to do inpatient treatment and then housing. So he works with them, they're doing great, and then they can't get no money for housing. Then they get violated. So my question is, how do we deal, that's somewhere to get information on recidivism. The jails, it's a good place because it's recidivism. And the treatment centers, because they have documentation. So partner with the treatment centers too, because we're all serving the same population. And so he asked this question, we asked you guys, is anybody studying that data when people are trying, like at these different agencies, and the recidivism happens not really when you get out of prison, but it happens from jail more often because more people are released from jail often. So it's another venue to look at. And then we end up in prison, but we first rotate in and out of jail first.
Having those connected data systems is really critical.
Data sharing.
Yep, and I know that, that in this state, I think we actually have some examples for other states to learn from on how we actually braid different state administrative data systems to be able to tell a better story of what's really going on. And so I think that is a unique feature that the state of Washington has. And I know there was some reorg and redesign when I first moved here that was focusing on, bringing early childhood, child welfare, and juvenile justice systems together and under one roof, and new administrative oversight that looks across those different systems to be able to, in attempt to make better policy decision making. I wish Lori was here still so that she could tell us from her viewpoint if she actually feels like that has made an impact. Emiko, you may have a feeling about, has that actually worked? We're 7 years into it now, that's a question to be asking.
Part of that, sorry. Anyway, that blue ribbon thing.
Emiko's going to come up and respond. I want Jennifer to really answer this question too, based on administrative work with the coalition.
If you're talking about DCYF and bringing all of the different early learning, child welfare, and juvenile rehab together, well, maybe Adrian can speak to it more than me, but I think it's had some effect, but it's still challenging. I think those are 3 different groups with different histories and potentially even different philosophies. And you were talking about data coming together and braiding data. I wouldn't say that the data are available in an organized way that we can look at outcomes across the different systems like we'd like to in a holistic way. So I think it's still a work in progress, I would say.
The Blue Ribbon Commission helping design it, right? And again, we have the outcomes of it in there. It's still, it made their own cabinet, got no funding, but it's, nothing's really changed per se. Because again, we didn't have those stakeholders and lived experience and the community stakeholders and the ground workers helping get it implemented and evaluating it. So it's kind of like this funded 3 cabinets, and then it doesn't, and it didn't bring in a whole person. It didn't bring in, which is a great idea. Now I'm thinking about it, and I'm working in it still. I'm a DOC, OPD social worker, social services worker with OPD, hands-on with families, partnering with DOC, DCYF, and CASAs and all that, and community providers. So the problem is, just to help you guys, that's great, but we're still siloed. So we're having a hard time with, I've like several incarcerated parents in my care. I'm the incarcerated parents liaison for the state now. And it's so hard to even get the visits, communication, and to get the parent. So I'm really working on training attorneys and social workers how to get on the Securus to call forget all this, spend your own money for a minute, because that's what we're doing, to get on Securus, to email my client, put money in their book so they can call. That's what I've been doing. I'm like ahead of the game. So it's still disconnected and siloed as far as, it was great with the rehabilitation youth and the families and early learning, but they left the other pieces out. Corrections, prevention, services in the community before we get here. So it was a great idea, and it has a lot of unintended consequences in it.
Policy is only as good as how well it's implemented, right? Yeah. Absolutely. I know that we are close to time. I'm hoping that, Jenny, you can respond to this question in terms of administrative policymaking, because your coalition descriptions have really been focused on congressional work, is to talk about some of the unique opportunities that coalition members have had in engaging in meetings at the White House and with the Children's Bureau and ACF in terms of how those connections with the administrative branch have led to idea development and implementation influence.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of really exciting events, I think, in this last year. Think of Us, which probably many of you know is a great organization, does a lot of advocacy, but also a lot of its own research. They did a big qualitative study about the impact of residential care on young people. That's just one example of, they're doing research as well as other things. But they did have a big summit at the White House, I think earlier in the year, and it was focused on kinship care. I know that was brought up earlier, and looking at that from the perspective of young people as well. And then there was an event really just about, I think, 3 weeks ago that was celebrating the 25th year of the Chafee Act, which is a federal law that provides funding to serve older youth. And that was an opportunity to have conversations both with lawmakers, but we did have some people from the Children's Bureau there as well. But Angelique, 3 things I just wanted to highlight really quickly that aren't getting as much attention that might be relevant just to researchers in the room is, I definitely agree, Rebecca, with what you were saying in terms of some of the things that could be included in the NOFO. I think what's in the NOFO will be really really importantly shaping what is in the end, kind of how those what pilots are funded. And I did note that there is before the pilot is the planning grant. And I think encouraging the NOFO to talk about that planning grant, really including a lot of the things that Angela, you and the other researchers understand that I don't, about what will be most impactful in terms of how the pilot is stood up and then studied. The other thing I just wanted to note is one of the things in the 4B bill that I think is important to a lot of people in the room is a clarification in the law that 4B services can be delivered through peer support. And I think that is really important that that's in the bill. But I think what we have less information on is peer support programs that have been studied, and of course distinguishing what we mean by peer support, whether it's in the mental health realm or the delivery of prevention services. But I think we have very little evidence about the impact of peer support for younger people, and younger people are asking for peer support and peer navigation, but we haven't studied a lot of that, and that could be really exciting for some of the researchers in the room. The third piece is just one of the sources of federal policy is something called the Child Welfare Manual. Many of you or some of you might have looked at that. And one of the questions that was asked and answered this year was about giving tribes the discretion and flexibility to create their own criteria for evidence-based prevention programs. And that I think is really exciting. And you could see, of course, Angelique, you mentioned the barriers to the evidence criteria really pushing out a lot of programs. This really does create an entree to see what does it look like when you do create your own criteria, and of course make them criteria that are meaningful, but make them ones that are more kind of adapted to the circumstances, and also that look at kind of quality in different ways. And I guess I haven't heard much since that child welfare manual question was answered. And that does seem a place where a lot of collaboration among researchers and tribes could really help in just kind of what is that going to look like? And can we expand that thinking to other areas just in the way we're thinking about funding prevention services? So I just thought those were kind of things that researchers could really help us move forward.
Those are wonderful suggestions. And I know ending on peer support, because we are running out of time, but Heather, I'm going to ask for forgiveness later and force you to the mic to talk a little bit about some of the work that you're doing, because I think that there's an opportunity here for you to inform some folks about what can that peer support look like and how do you define it, and what do we know based on the research, so that conversation can continue to move forward.
So what I'm going to say is that I know nothing. No, I don't know nothing. I run a mentoring program. It's not peer support, but there was a very important review that just came out about credible messengers and mentors in part. And so I just wrote a note to send that to you. It's Jenny or Jennifer. And I'm happy to share it with you, Angelique, and then you could send it out to all folks here. There's both a practice implications and sort of a more systematic review. It does have a lens coming from the youth mentoring movement. And obviously credible mentors and messengers are used in a lot of different areas. There's also peer support specialists that are now being credentialed in different areas. So I'm not an expert on this, but I'm happy to share the resources that I have pulled together. And I don't know everybody's research as well as I know Heather's. I could probably call some other people out, but I won't. But I want you to think about your connection in your own research into the conversation that we have had. I want you to remember that this is a conversation starter, not a start and finish. We are only starting today. And I want to really inspire the rest of you who are working on research that has a direct impact on the conversations we have had. This is a good time to influence 4B implementation. What is that looking like? And what is left undone? We have a brand new legislative session starting up. What do we want to have conversations about with our elected officials and our brilliant legislative staffers who can take these stories and use it to develop the best research or the best policies that we can build? Let's continue this collective conversation. And so on that note, because we are at time, we're going to move into our closing. And so I'm going to bring up Dean Spencer to help close us out.
Well, thank you all for being here today. Can we get a nice round of applause for all of the panelists today as well? And all of you for asking great questions. You know, I was sorry I couldn't be here for the whole time. I had to go attend to our faculty council. So I didn't get to hear everything, but some of the nuggets that I heard really were around not just research and policy, but also implementation and how we do these things. How do we implement these programs in a way that truly reflect the life experiences of our clients, as well as sets them up for the best outcomes possible. So I look forward to your all's research. I look forward to the good work that's to come. Obviously, as stated by Angelique, this is just the beginning. I hope that this is something that will be an ongoing conversation, and I hope that we can be a part of it at the University of Washington. Now, I know that being the only person between food and a long day. Oh, okay. So there's going to be one more person, so I won't be totally between your food. So I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Thank you so much. And a very, very special thank you to Dean Spencer for giving us the space and helping to facilitate this to the University of Washington. I just thanked you, Dean Spencer. So thank you very, very much. And for our lovely space and lovely faculty colleagues. We really appreciate it, University of Washington School of Social Work. Also, thank you to the sponsors of this event, Arnold Ventures. For those of you that aren't already engaged with them, they are a philanthropic foundation that supports research as well as research that translating research into policy action and into advocacy work. So they support advocacy organizations, they support researchers, they support political policy related type of work. So thank you to Arnold Ventures. Thank you to all of our panelists and all of the attendees again for a fabulous conversation. And we hope that you continue to have fabulous conversation over drinks and food, maybe over here or maybe over there. It looks very pretty. I see roses. So we'll start there for the reception. It's on both sides. Food is on this side. Okay. Food is on this side. So go that way. And we'll create some more space in here too. So again, thank you, everybody.